There's a place on this earth that breathes, not metaphorically, not as a poetic device meant to stir your imagination, but literally, physiologically, in a way that science has only begun to measure and understand. It exhales water vapor in quantities so enormous that it generates its own weather systems. It inhales carbon dioxide and transforms it into living matter at a rate that staggers the mind. It pulses with an energy so dense, so layered, so incomprehensibly complex that the researchers who have dedicated their entire careers to studying it will freely admit, sometimes with a kind of reverent humility, that they have barely scratched the surface. This place is the Amazon rainforest. Stretching across more than 5.5 million square kilometers, covering vast portions of an entire continent, housing an estimated 10% of all species on Earth, and generating rainfall cycles that influence climates thousands of kilometers away, the Amazon is not simply a forest. It is a world unto itself. It operates by rules that took hundreds of millions of years to establish. It has been shaped by forces of geography, climate, water, and time in combinations so specific, so particular to this one region of the planet, that nothing quite like it exists anywhere else. And within it, life has found ways to survive, to compete, to cooperate, to deceive, and to evolve that challenge everything we think we understand about the natural world. This documentary is an invitation. It is an invitation to slow down, to look carefully, to resist the impulse to reduce the Amazon to a series of highlights or a checklist of impressive creatures. Because the truth of this place is not found in its most dramatic moments. The truth of the Amazon is found in its details, in the particular way a leaf holds a droplet of water, in the specific angle at which a frog positions its body against a vine, in the almost imperceptible electrical signal passing between two animals separated by murky, tea-colored water. The Amazon rewards patience, it rewards attention, and over the course of the next several hours, that is precisely what we are going to give it. We are going to move through this forest slowly, the way it demands to be experienced. We are going to descend through its canopy layers, drift through its flooded waterways, sit in its deep nocturnal darkness, and follow the lives of creatures whose strategies for survival are so extraordinary that they seem, at first encounter, almost impossible. We are going to spend time with the scientists who have devoted themselves to understanding this place, and we are going to be honest about the limits of what is known, because in a forest of this scale and complexity, honesty about ignorance is itself a form of respect. The Amazon is not a solved mystery. It is not a place that has been catalogued and understood and filed away. It is a living system of ongoing discovery, where new species are found with remarkable regularity, where established scientific assumptions are regularly overturned, and where the deeper you look, the more you realize how much there is still to see. What you are about to experience is not a final word on the Amazon. It is a beginning, a doorway, a first step into a forest that has no end. So let us begin at the beginning. Let us begin with what the Amazon actually is, before we talk about what lives within it. Imagine standing at the edge of the Atlantic Ocean on the eastern coast of South America. The water is warm and heavy with humidity. Trade winds blow steadily from east to west, carrying moisture inland from the ocean's surface. As this moist air travels over the continent, it encounters the vast flat basin of the Amazon, and then far to the west, it encounters the dramatic vertical wall of the Andes Mountains. The mountains force the moisture-laden air upward, where it cools and condenses and falls as rain in almost incomprehensible quantities. But here is what makes the Amazon system truly unique and truly self-sustaining. Once that rain falls on the forest, it does not simply run off into rivers and disappear. The trees absorb it, the soil holds it, and then through the process of transpiration, the forest releases it back into the atmosphere in the form of water vapor. This released vapor forms clouds, which produce more rain, which falls on the forest again, which transpires again, creating a cycle of water recycling that scientists have called the flying rivers of the Amazon. Aerial rivers of invisible water vapor carrying moisture from the Atlantic deep into the heart of a continent, sustained not by geography alone but by the living forest itself. This is why the Amazon is not merely a product of its environment. It is, in a very real sense, a creator of it. Remove the forest and the rainfall patterns collapse. The soil, no longer held together by root systems and organic matter, erodes. The rivers change character. The regional climate shifts. The Amazon is not a passive inhabitant of its geography. It is an active participant in the atmospheric systems that keep it alive. It maintains itself through a kind of biological feedback loop of staggering elegance and staggering fragility. The basin through which all of this water flows, the Amazon River System, is the largest river system on Earth by volume. The Amazon River itself discharges more fresh water into the ocean than the next 7 largest rivers in the world combined. At its mouth, it pushes so much fresh water into the Atlantic that salinity levels are measurably altered over 100 kilometers offshore. During the wet season, the river and its hundreds of tributaries overflow their banks and flood an area larger than many entire countries, creating an ecosystem called the Varzea, or flooded forest, where water and woodland merge into something that belongs to neither category entirely. In the Varzea, trees stand in several meters of water for months at a time. Fish swim through what was, just weeks earlier, dry forest floor. River dolphins navigate between tree trunks the way they would navigate between rocks and boulders in other river systems. Seeds drift on currents and find purchase on elevated ground. And the species that live in this environment have adapted over millions of years to a life that oscillates between aquatic and terrestrial, wet and dry, flooded and exposed, in ways that produce some of the most extraordinary biological innovations found anywhere on Earth. But before we descend into the water, before we explore the flooded forests and the rivers that fill them, we need to spend time in the forest itself. We need to understand the structure of the place because the Amazon is not a single environment. It is a layered system of distinct microhabitats, each with its own conditions of light, temperature, humidity, and biological community. Each layer of the forest presents different challenges and different opportunities, and the creatures that inhabit each layer have evolved in response to the specific pressures of their particular zone within this vast, vertically organized world. The emergent layer is the top, where the tallest trees punch through the general canopy and expose their crowns to direct sunlight. Here, the conditions are almost contradictory in their intensity. More light than anywhere else in the forest, but also more heat, more wind, more variation in temperature and humidity. The trees that reach this layer are giants, sometimes 40 to 60 meters tall, with massive buttressed roots that spread out at their bases like the fins of some enormous fish, stabilizing them against the winds that move freely at this altitude. In their canopies, harpy eagles nest and survey vast territories. Macaws in their brilliant, almost improbably vivid colors move between flowering trees in pairs and small flocks, their calls cutting through the air with a clarity that nothing in the layers below can match. Below the emergent trees, the continuous canopy forms a dense, interconnected ceiling over the forest. This is the most productive zone in terms of photosynthesis, where leaves capture the majority of the available sunlight before it can penetrate further downward. The canopy is extraordinarily biodiverse, containing the majority of the Amazon's plant species and the majority of its animal species as well. The connectivity of the canopy, the way branches and lianas bridge between trees, creates an elevated highway system through which monkeys, sloths, snakes, frogs, and insects move with remarkable facility, rarely if ever needing to descend to the ground. Further below, the understory is a dim, filtered world. Only 2 to 5% of the sunlight that falls on the canopy above makes it down to this level. The plants that survive here have evolved extraordinarily large leaves to capture every available photon. The animals that thrive here have evolved extraordinary sensory adaptations to navigate in near darkness. Sounds carry differently here than they do in the canopy above. The air is stiller, cooler, and more consistently humid. It is a world defined by subtlety, by quietness, by the particular quality of light that comes through so many layers of vegetation that it arrives green and diffuse and ancient feeling, as if the very atmosphere has been tinted by the forest above. And then there is the forest floor itself, the deepest, darkest layer where less than 1% of the available sunlight reaches. A place of profound shadow and extraordinary biological activity that is almost entirely invisible to the casual eye. The floor of the Amazon is not the silent, still place it might appear to be at a glance. It is a system of frantic, relentless decomposition and recycling. Fallen leaves, dead wood, animal matter, the detritus of everything happening in the layers above, all of it accumulates here and is processed by a community of fungi, bacteria, insects, and invertebrates of such complexity and efficiency that a fallen leaf in the Amazon may be entirely decomposed and its nutrients recycled back into the living forest within weeks. The forest floor is a digestive system, and it works with a speed and completeness that is genuinely remarkable given the quantity of material falling into it every day. Understanding this layered structure is essential to understanding the creatures we are about to meet, because every species we will discuss has been shaped not just by the Amazon in general, but by the specific layer, the specific microhabitat, the specific set of conditions within the Amazon that it calls home. Evolution does not work in general terms, it works in specifics. And the Amazon, with its extraordinary diversity of specific conditions packed into a single, vast geographic space, has generated a corresponding diversity of specific, precise, and often astonishing biological solutions to the challenges of survival. Let us begin with one of the most fundamental challenges that any creature in the Amazon must face, and one of the most elegant solutions that evolution has produced in response to it. The challenge is visibility. The opportunity is invisibility. In a forest this dense, this layered, this full of predators and prey occupying the same spaces, being seen is often a matter of life and death. The predator that is seen too soon loses its prey. The prey animal that is seen at all may lose its life. And so, over millions of generations, the Amazon has become, among many other things, a master class in the art of not being noticed. The strategies of concealment that have evolved here range from the straightforward to the bewildering, from the elegant to the almost philosophically challenging in their implications. Consider first what it means to be invisible in an environment like the Amazon understory. The light is dim and green filtered. Surfaces are covered in mosses, lichens, bark patterns, and the irregular textures of decaying organic matter. The visual environment is not a simple background of uniform color against which a creature might stand out. It is a complex, variable, constantly shifting mosaic of texture and tone and subtle variation. To be invisible here requires not just matching a color, but matching a pattern, matching a texture, matching the way light falls across a surface, matching the way the edges of a shape transition from one tone to another. This is what the best of the Amazon's cryptic species have accomplished, and the results are breathtaking in their precision. The Potu bird is perhaps one of the most startling demonstrations of evolved concealment anywhere in the natural world. These medium-sized birds belong to an ancient family nocturnal hunters related to nightjars, with enormous eyes adapted for catching insects in darkness. During the day, however, the Potu must rest, and resting in the Amazon understory while being a bird of substantial size presents a problem. You are vulnerable, you are stationary, you need to not be found. The Potu's solution is to become a piece of dead wood, not metaphorically, not approximately. The plumage of the Potu is a precise, intricate tapestry of grays, browns, blacks, and whites arranged in patterns that replicate, with extraordinary fidelity, the bark surface, lichens, and weathering marks of a dead tree branch. When a Potu finds a suitable perch, typically the broken end of a dead branch or a snag protruding from the side of a tree, it adopts a specific posture. It elongates its body, tilts its head upward at an angle, closes its eyes to slits, and becomes, to any visual observer including trained human researchers who know exactly where to look, essentially indistinguishable from the branch itself. The degree of precision in this mimicry is not accidental. It is the product of millions of years of selection pressure, where any individual whose plumage was slightly less convincing, whose posture was slightly less committed, whose choice of perch was slightly less appropriate, was more likely to be found by a predator and eliminated from the gene pool. What remains is a creature whose entire existence during daylight hours is built around a single, extraordinarily refined performance. But what makes the Potoo's concealment truly remarkable is the level at which it operates. It is not just about color matching. It is about understanding at some fundamental behavioral level that the deception only works if every element is correct simultaneously. The right plumage, the right posture, the right perch, the right behavior of complete stillness, maintained without exception throughout the entire period of vulnerability. The Potoo does not shift or fidget. It does not react to most stimuli. It holds its performance with a commitment that, if we were to observe it in a human context, we might describe as a kind of absolute, disciplined focus. The Potoo's large eyes, closed to slits during daylight concealment, are not entirely shut. The eyelids have small notches cut into them, which allow the bird to monitor its environment without revealing the reflective surface of its eyes, which would immediately betray its living nature against the dull surface of simulated dead wood. This is a detail of such precise evolutionary refinement that it rewards extended contemplation. The bird has essentially evolved seeing slits in its eyelids specifically to maintain surveillance while appearing to be inanimate. The concealment goes all the way down. When the Potoo does open its eyes fully, when night falls and it emerges from its daytime stillness to hunt, the contrast is startling. Those enormous eyes, yellow and brilliant, catch whatever light is available and magnify it, giving the bird a visual acuity in near darkness that allows it to detect and pursue flying insects with remarkable accuracy. The Potoo sallies from its perch, makes brief aerial pursuits of moths and beetles and other nocturnal insects attracted to whatever ambient light is available, and then returns to its branch. It is a creature of two completely different modes, one defined by absolute stillness and invisibility, one defined by precision aerial predation in darkness, and it transitions between them with the rhythm of the sun. We will return to nocturnal strategies later in our exploration. But the Potoo raises a broader question that is worth sitting with as we continue through the forest. What does it cost an animal to be invisible? What does it cost to commit so completely to concealment that you must remain entirely motionless for hours at a time, regardless of what happens around you? The answer is that it costs a great deal in terms of flexibility and response to changing situations. A Potoo that breaks its concealment to escape a non-threatening stimulus might be seen by a real predator. So the Potoo has to be right, has to accurately assess every stimulus it receives while maintaining its stillness, has to make constant, rapid decisions about whether what it is detecting represents a real threat requiring movement or a false alarm requiring continued stillness. Concealment is not passive. It is an active, cognitively demanding strategy that requires ongoing assessment and decision-making even when it looks, from the outside, like nothing at all is happening. This tension between stillness and response, between the cost of maintaining concealment and the necessity of eventually breaking it, is one of the central dramas of life in the Amazon understory, and it plays out in remarkably different ways across the enormous diversity of cryptic species that the forest has produced. The glass frog represents a completely different approach to the same fundamental challenge of not being seen, and it operates on a principle so counterintuitive that it took researchers some time to fully understand why it works as well as it does. Glass frogs are small, arboreal amphibians found in Central and South American rainforests, with a substantial portion of their diversity concentrated in the Amazon basin. They are named for their most immediately obvious characteristic. The skin on their undersides is transparent, not translucent, transparent. Holding a glass frog up to light reveals its beating heart, its digestive system, the pale forms of its organs moving within its body. It is as if someone has constructed a frog out of living glass, and the effect is genuinely startling the first time you encounter it. But here is the question that immediately presents itself: why? Why would transparency be an effective concealment strategy for an animal that sits on the upper surfaces of leaves, exposed to sunlight in a green environment? Surely a solid green frog would blend into a green leaf more effectively than a see-through one. The answer, which researchers have worked to understand through careful optical analysis, lies in the particular way that transparency affects the visual boundary of the animal's body. One of the primary challenges of any camouflage strategy is dealing with the edges of the body, the outline, the silhouette. A solid object on a complex background, even if its surface color and texture match the background well, will still be detectable because its edge creates a clear, sharp boundary between the animal's body and the environment. The brain of a predator looking for prey has evolved specifically to detect these kinds of edges, these discontinuities in the visual field. Transparency disrupts this edge detection in a profound way. The edges of a transparent frog do not present a sharp boundary between the animal and its background. Instead, the transition is gradual because the glass frog's body allows the leaf surface beneath it to show through. From the edge inward, what a predator sees is not a sudden shift from leaf to frog, but a gradual blending, a zone of ambiguity where the visual signal of the leaf continues even through the frog's own tissues. The frog, in a sense, carries its background with it, incorporating the surface it sits on into its own visual presentation. This principle, which researchers describe as edge diffusion, is found in various forms in other transparent or semi-transparent animals across the natural world, but in the glass frog, it has been refined to an extraordinary degree. The transparency of the frog's underside means that when it sits on a leaf, it seems to melt into the surface, its edges dissolving into the green of the vegetation around it. Add to this the green coloration of the frog's dorsal surface, which matches the leaf from above, and you have an animal whose concealment works simultaneously from multiple angles, from below through transparency, from above through color matching, and from the sides through the edge dissolving effect of the transition zone. The evolutionary story of glass frogs is also interesting because it illustrates how a strategy can become more refined over successive generations. Among the glass frog species of the Amazon, there is a gradient of transparency, from species where only the ventral skin is clear while the organs themselves are covered by a whitish tissue, to species where even the organs are exposed to view. And the degree of transparency appears to correlate with the particular visual environments these frogs inhabit and the specific predators they face. Natural selection has pushed different lineages to different solutions within the same general framework, depending on the precise circumstances of their individual ecologies. Glass frogs are also notable for an aspect of their behavior that is somewhat unusual among amphibians: the extent of male parental care. Male glass frogs will guard egg clutches deposited on leaves above streams, protecting them from predators and, in some species, actively hydrating the eggs by pressing their water-absorbent bodies against them during dry periods. This behavior is fascinating in its own right, but it creates an interesting tension with the concealment strategy. A male frog sitting on an egg clutch is more constrained in its ability to flee predators than a free-ranging frog would be. The commitment to parental care means accepting an elevated level of vulnerability. Once again, the Amazon demonstrates that every strategy has its costs, and every adaptation exists within a web of trade-offs rather than as a simple, uncomplicated solution. The egg clutches themselves, deposited on leaf surfaces overhanging streams, so that when the tadpoles hatch they fall directly into the water below, represent an elegant solution to a different problem: the vulnerability of aquatic larvae in heavily predated streams. By beginning life in the relative safety of the leaf surface, rather than directly in the water, glass frog tadpoles avoid the most dangerous phase of the aquatic predation gauntlet. The leaf is a refuge, a launching pad, a temporary world between the safety of the embryonic environment and the challenge of the aquatic one. What glass frogs teach us, as we stand in the humid understory watching one sit motionless on a leaf above a darkening stream, is that transparency as a survival strategy is more sophisticated than it first appears. It is not simply a matter of being hard to see. It is a precisely calibrated optical solution to a specific perceptual challenge, shaped over millions of years of predator-prey interaction into something that is, when you understand the optics and the biology behind it, genuinely beautiful in its logical elegance. From concealment, we move to communication, and in the Amazon, communication is rarely simple. The forest presents organisms with a paradox in terms of signal transmission. It is a world packed so densely with living matter, with layers upon layers of vegetation, with the constant background noise of rainfall and water movement and the calls of thousands of creatures simultaneously, that sending clear signals is an extraordinary challenge. Visual signals are blocked by vegetation within meters. Acoustic signals are absorbed, reflected, and distorted by the complex architecture of the forest. Chemical signals, which work over longer distances in more open environments, disperse and mix in the humid, complex air of the understory in ways that reduce their specificity and reliability. And yet life here communicates constantly. It must. Finding mates, coordinating group behavior, establishing territories, warning of predators, coordinating hunts, maintaining social bonds. These things are as necessary in the Amazon as anywhere else in the natural world, perhaps more so given the difficulties of finding other individuals of your own species in the density and confusion of the forest. The pressure to communicate reliably in an environment that resists reliable communication has produced, over millions of years, some of the most sophisticated and unusual communication systems found anywhere on Earth. We will spend considerable time with one of the most extraordinary of these systems when we reach the rivers. But first, let us appreciate the acoustic environment of the forest itself, because sound in the Amazon is a phenomenon of remarkable complexity and beauty. Stand in the Amazon understory at dawn and close your eyes. What you hear is not chaos, although it might initially seem that way. It is a structured acoustic landscape, organized in ways that researchers have only recently begun to fully understand. Different species occupy different frequency bands, different time slots, different spatial positions within the acoustic environment. The forest has, over millions of years of evolutionary history, developed something that researchers call the acoustic niche hypothesis in practice. The idea that species partition the acoustic environment in ways that reduce interference between their signals, each occupying a particular combination of frequency, timing, and spatial position that allows its signal to be heard and distinguished from the signals of others. The result is what people who spend time in the Amazon often describe as the most complex and beautiful soundscape in the natural world. Layers of insect sound form a continuous shifting background. Over this, birds call in frequencies and rhythms that cut through the insect sound without being masked by it. Frogs and toads, primarily active at dawn and dusk and through the night, occupy frequencies and patterns that fit into the spaces between the bird calls. The whole system is not composed or arranged by any individual. It is an emergent property of millions of years of independent evolutionary refinement, each species finding its own acoustic niche, all of them together creating something that sounds, to human ears, remarkably like a composition. This acoustic environment has shaped communication strategies in profound ways. Animals that need to be heard have evolved calls that cut through the specific interference patterns of the forest with remarkable precision. The three-wattled bellbird, for example, produces one of the loudest sounds of any bird in the world, a metallic, piercing call audible for considerable distances through dense vegetation, its frequency and amplitude specifically tuned to overcome the masking effects of the forest acoustic environment. The Uarapuru, a bird whose song is considered one of the most beautiful in the Amazon, produces a remarkably complex, variable cascading call whose frequency pattern takes advantage of the particular acoustic properties of the understory in ways that allow it to travel further and remain more recognizable than a simpler call would. But acoustic communication in the Amazon is not just about being heard. It is also about being heard by the right receivers while not being heard by the wrong ones. Every call that announces your presence to a potential mate also announces your presence to every predator within earshot. The Amazon has produced a variety of strategies for managing this trade-off, including ventriloquism, the ability of certain frogs and birds to produce calls whose apparent source location is extremely difficult for a listener to pinpoint, and rapid directionality changes, where animals move between calls to prevent any listener from triangulating their position. The complexity of communication in the Amazon extends far beyond sound, and we will explore some of its other dimensions as we move toward the water. But this foundation of acoustic sophistication gives us a sense of the general principle at work. In an environment that makes communication difficult, the evolutionary pressure for communication innovation is intense. An intensity of evolutionary pressure, sustained over long periods of time, produces extraordinary results. The Amazon River system is, if anything, even more complex and strange than the forest above it, and the creatures that have evolved within it demonstrate some of the most extraordinary biological innovations found anywhere on Earth. The first thing to understand about the water of the Amazon is that there is not one kind of water here. There are several dramatically different in their chemistry, their color, their biological productivity, and their character, and the differences between them are not subtle. They are visible to the naked eye, and they reflect entirely different histories and entirely different ecologies. The whitewater rivers, whose most famous representative is the main stem Amazon itself, carry enormous quantities of suspended sediment eroded from the Andes Mountains. The sediment gives the water a distinctive pale, milky color, what travelers have historically described as white, though it is more accurately a pale brownish gray. This sediment load carries enormous quantities of nutrients, making white water systems relatively productive in terms of biological life. Fish are abundant here, plant growth is vigorous, and the rivers support large populations of large animals, giant river otters, river dolphins, caimans, giant catfish of several species. The black water rivers, of which the Rio Negro is the most famous, present a completely different picture. These rivers drain ancient geological formations, the old shields of the Guiana highlands and the Brazilian shield, landscapes that have been leached of nutrients by millions of years of rainfall. The water that flows off these ancient surfaces carries almost no suspended sediment and almost no dissolved mineral nutrients. What it does carry is an enormous load of dissolved organic matter, the tannins and humic acids leached from the decaying leaf litter of the forests through which it drains. These compounds stain the water the color of dark tea or coffee, filtering out sunlight and creating a visual environment of deep amber and brown rather than the murky gray of the white water rivers. Black water rivers are, by most conventional measures, biological deserts. The nutrient levels are so low that primary productivity is minimal. Fish are present, but in lower densities than in white water systems. The water is acidic, sometimes approaching the acidity of black coffee. And yet the animals that have evolved in black water systems are not simply impoverished versions of white water species. They are specialists, adapted to the specific challenges and, surprisingly, the specific opportunities that the unique chemistry of these rivers presents. One of those opportunities is freedom from parasites. The acid, nutrient-poor conditions of black water rivers are inhospitable to many of the pathogens, parasites, and external parasites that plague fish in more productive systems. Certain groups of fish show higher parasite loads in white water than in black water, and some species seem to actively seek out black water for spawning, possibly because the larval stage is particularly vulnerable to parasitic infection, and black water provides a period of relative safety during this critical phase. The meeting of black water and white water rivers produces one of the most visually dramatic phenomena in the Amazon, the meeting of the waters near the city of Manaus, where the dark Rio Negro meets the pale Amazon main stem. For many kilometers downstream of this confluence, the two water masses flow side by side without mixing, separated by a sharp boundary visible from the air and from the riverbank. They have different temperatures, different densities, different flow velocities, and it is these physical differences, not just the color difference, that keep them segregated until their properties gradually equalize through turbulence and mixing downstream. This mixing zone is a productive area of high biological diversity, as organisms adapted to both water types can access resources in both. The ecological boundary between water types, like all ecological boundaries or ecotones, tends to concentrate biological diversity and biological activity. But it also concentrates the extraordinary predators that have evolved to exploit such concentrations of prey. Now into this complex, multi-layered aquatic world, let us introduce one of its most remarkable inhabitants, an animal that represents the intersection of advanced sensory adaptation and sophisticated social behavior in a way that challenges many assumptions about the cognitive capacities of fish. The electric eel is not actually an eel. It is a knife fish, more closely related to catfish and carp than to true eels, and it has evolved in the warm, oxygen-poor, often murky waters of the Amazon basin into something that defies easy categorization. The electric eel can reach lengths of 2.5 meters and weights of 20 kilograms. It can produce electrical discharges of up to 800 volts. And it has, as researchers have recently discovered, a hunting strategy that goes far beyond what was previously understood, involving coordinated group behavior and a sophisticated deployment of electrical signals that suggests a level of social complexity in a fish that was previously assumed to be essentially solitary. The electric eel's electrical system is the product of 3 specialized organs that together take up roughly 80% of the animal's body length. The vast majority of the electric eel's vital organs are compressed into the front 20% of its body, while the remaining 80% is essentially a living battery, composed of thousands of modified muscle cells called electrocytes that have, over evolutionary time, lost their ability to contract and instead channel their electrochemical potential into the production of electrical current. This electrical system serves multiple purposes. At its lowest output, the electric eel uses what are called low-voltage signals for navigation and communication, sending out weak pulses and detecting the distortions these pulses create when they interact with objects in the environment. This is a form of active electrolocation, similar in principle to echolocation, but using electrical fields rather than sound waves. The eel maps its environment through the pattern of electrical distortions it detects around itself, allowing it to navigate in the murky, low-visibility water of the Amazon with a precision that its visual system alone could never provide. At medium output, the electric eel uses its electrical system to detect hidden prey. Many potential prey animals, fish and invertebrates hiding in bottom sediment or under submerged vegetation, have small electrical fields generated by their own muscle activity. The electric eel can detect these fields, revealing the presence of hidden animals that no visual or mechanical sensory system could locate. This is, in a sense, a kind of biological X-ray vision, the ability to see through hiding places and detect the electrical signatures of living animals. At full output, the electric eel delivers its hunting discharge, a series of high-voltage pulses that cause involuntary muscle contractions in prey animals, effectively remote controlling their bodies. A fish struck by a full electric eel discharge does not simply experience pain and flee. Its muscles contract involuntarily and uncontrollably, causing it to break from cover, to move erratically, to betray its hiding place and its position. The eel follows the involuntary movements of its electrically stimulated prey and strikes at the body it has compelled into visibility. This hunting technique is itself remarkable, but what researchers have recently documented in certain Amazon populations takes the electric eel's sophistication to an entirely different level. In shallow water environments during the dry season, when prey fish are concentrated into confined pools by falling water levels, groups of electric eels have been observed hunting cooperatively. Not loosely, not in the vague sense of multiple individuals taking advantage of the same prey concentration. Actively, coordinately, with what appears to be genuine behavioral synchrony between individuals. The observed hunting sequence works approximately as follows. A group of electric eels, sometimes 10 to 100 individuals depending on the concentration of prey available, will herd a school of small fish into an increasingly confined space, a shallow area near the bank, a narrowing pocket of water between submerged logs, a gradually diminishing volume as the eels circle and the fish compress. Once the prey school is sufficiently concentrated and confined, the eels begin to coordinate their electrical discharges. The synchronization of electrical discharges from multiple animals in a confined water volume creates a combined electrical field that is far more powerful than what any individual can produce, powerful enough to affect large numbers of prey fish simultaneously, powerful enough to temporarily stun or incapacitate animals that a single eel's discharge would not reliably affect. The fish, overwhelmed by the combined electrical output, float to the surface and the eels feed. This behavior was documented systematically relatively recently by researchers who spent considerable time observing and recording eel behavior in appropriate field conditions, and it has significant implications for our understanding of fish cognition and social behavior. The coordination required for this kind of group hunting, even if it is achieved through relatively simple mechanisms of electrical signal recognition and behavioral response rather than through the complex social cognition we associate with mammalian cooperative hunting, still represents a level of social behavioral sophistication in a fish that was previously unrecognized. What mechanism do the eels use to coordinate their discharges? Researchers believe that the low-voltage communication signals that the eels normally use for environmental sensing and individual communication also play a role in social coordination during group hunts. The eels can detect each other's electrical signals with high sensitivity, and the pattern of signals exchanged between individuals during the build up to a coordinated discharge may function as a kind of primitive call and response synchronization, each eel adjusting its own discharge timing in response to the signals it detects from its neighbors, until the group falls into a pattern of near simultaneous firing. This is, in essence, a biological version of what happens when people in a room start clapping in rhythm. Individual signals from neighbors provide the cues that allow a group to synchronize, without any individual necessarily having an overview of the whole system. The coordination emerges from local rules of response applied simultaneously by all individuals in the group. It is a remarkable example of emergent collective behavior achieved through a sensory modality that is entirely unique to this group of animals. The electric eel's social hunting behavior also illuminates something important about the ecological role of this animal in the Amazon system. A single electric eel hunting alone can capture individual prey effectively, but is limited in the scale and efficiency of its predation. A group of electric eels hunting cooperatively can dramatically reduce the prey populations in a confined pool during the dry season, with significant effects on the composition and abundance of the fish community in that area. The behavior is not just interesting from a cognitive or behavioral standpoint. It is ecologically significant, representing a mechanism by which electric eels as a population exert a particularly strong selective pressure on prey species during the period of maximum vulnerability, the dry season concentration into shrinking water bodies. Prey fish in electric eel habitat have, predictably, evolved counter-adaptations. Some species have reduced electroreceptive sensitivity thresholds, making them more sensitive to the weak electrical signals that precede a hunting discharge, potentially allowing them to detect the buildup of a coordinated attack before it reaches its peak. Others have evolved behavioral responses to electrical stimulation that differ from the typical freezing or erratic movement response, which might be adaptive in allowing them to escape the area of maximum electrical field intensity during an eel discharge. The evolutionary arms race between electric eels and their prey continues, as it has for millions of years, each side driving adaptations in the other in an ongoing process of co-evolution. Before we leave the aquatic environment for now, before we follow the water in a different direction and explore the world beneath the flooded forest canopy, we need to spend time with another kind of biological influence that operates in the Amazon in ways that are simultaneously fascinating and deeply strange. The Amazon has produced, over its long evolutionary history, a set of organisms whose relationship to other living things crosses the boundary between the straightforward categories of predator, prey, parasite, and host. These are organisms that do not simply consume others or defend themselves against being consumed. They manipulate, they redirect. They co-opt the biological machinery of other living things to serve their own purposes in ways that represent some of the most sophisticated and unsettling biological strategies in the natural world. The Ophiocordyceps fungi, sometimes called zombie fungi in popular descriptions, represent one of the most dramatic examples of biological manipulation found anywhere on Earth, and the Amazon rainforest harbors a remarkable diversity of species within this group. These fungi are parasites of insects, primarily ants, and their life cycle involves a manipulation of host behavior so precise and so specifically calibrated to the fungus's reproductive needs that it has been called, by researchers who study it, one of the most complex host-parasite interactions known to science. The infection begins when a fungal spore, released from a previously infected ant or from a spore body growing on a dead host, comes into contact with a living ant and adheres to its cuticle. The spore germinates and the fungus begins to grow through the insect's body, but in a way that is, at first, non-lethal. The ant continues to live and to behave normally while the fungus is colonizing its tissues. At this stage, the ant shows no visible signs of infection and apparently no behavioral abnormalities. The fungus grows within the ant's body while avoiding the critical tissues and organs that would cause immediate death. Then, at a point determined by the fungus's developmental stage and critically by environmental conditions of temperature and humidity, something changes. The ant begins to behave abnormally. It leaves its normal path. It exhibits disorientation. It shows what researchers describe as a wandering behavior, moving away from the colony and away from the normal trail system. It eventually reaches a specific zone within the forest, typically a particular height above the ground, between 10 and 30 centimeters depending on the fungal species, corresponding to a specific microenvironment of temperature and humidity that is optimal for the fungus's sporulation. There, the ant bites into a leaf vein with its mandibles in a grip so powerful that it cannot be released, and it dies. The grip, enforced by the fungal manipulation of the ant's jaw muscles, holds the dead ant in place as the fungus continues its development, eventually producing a fruiting body that erupts from the ant's head and releases spores downward, where they are most likely to encounter other ants moving along trails below. The precision of this manipulation is astonishing. The fungus does not simply make the ant behave randomly or erratically. It directs the ant to a specific location, at a specific height in a specific microhabitat, positions it on a specific type of substrate, the underside of a leaf vein, and enforces a specific bite posture, all of which together create the precise conditions the fungus needs for its own reproduction. This is not a blunt instrument. This is a biological program of extraordinary specificity, and it has evolved this specificity because any deviation from the optimal conditions reduces the fungus's reproductive success. How the fungus achieves this control is an area of active research. The fungal cells do not penetrate the ant's brain, which might be the obvious mechanism for behavioral control. Instead, the fungal cells spread through the ant's body in ways that affect its musculature and its nervous system through chemical signals rather than direct invasion. The fungus produces compounds that interact with the ant's nervous system, and the manipulation of behavior appears to result from the specific combination and timing of these chemical signals rather than from any direct structural disruption of the brain. What this means is that the fungus has essentially evolved a pharmacological solution to the challenge of behavior manipulation. It has developed a toolkit of biologically active compounds that interact specifically and precisely with the neural and muscular systems of its ant host in ways that produce the exact behavioral sequence the fungus needs. This toolkit is different for different fungal species that parasitize different ant species, and it is specifically tuned to the particular nervous system architecture of the target host. A species of Ophiocordyceps that manipulates one species of ant cannot effectively manipulate another because its chemical toolkit is calibrated for the specific biochemistry of its specific target. The evolutionary arms race between these fungi and their ant hosts is one of the most intense and interesting in the Amazon. Ants have evolved behavioral responses to the presence of infected individuals within their colonies, including removal of infected ants to locations far from the colony before the fungus reaches its infectious stage. In some species, workers will carry an infected nestmate far from the colony and leave it there, apparently recognizing behavioral signs of infection at a relatively early stage. This represents a colony-level immune response, a social behavior that reduces the risk of fungal infection spreading to other colony members by removing infected individuals before they can contaminate the area with spores. The fungi, in turn, appear to have evolved countermeasures to this removal behavior, including the production of compounds that suppress the recognition behavior of healthy nestmates, reducing the likelihood that an infected individual will be detected and removed before it has reached the optimal location and completed the fungal life cycle. The interaction between the fungal manipulation toolkit and the ant immune behavior system has been escalating in evolutionary time for what appears to be a very long period, with each side driving adaptations in the other in an arms race whose current state represents just a snapshot in an ongoing process. The Ophiocordyceps fungi are not the only manipulators in the Amazon, but they are perhaps the most dramatic. And they raise a question that is worth sitting with as we consider the other biological strategies we have explored. What is the line between influence and manipulation, and at what point does the relationship between two organisms become something fundamentally different from predation or competition? The fungus does not consume the ant in the traditional sense. It does not simply kill it and extract its nutrients. It uses the ant as an agent, directing its behavior to serve the fungus's reproductive needs, and only then consuming what remains. The distinction is subtle but significant because it represents a different kind of relationship between organisms, one based not on direct exploitation of matter and energy, but on the exploitation of another organism's behavioral capabilities. The fungus is using the ant not as food but as a vehicle, as a mechanism, as a tool. This kind of relationship, where one organism manipulates the behavior of another for its own reproductive or survival benefit, is more common in the Amazon than most people realize, and it represents one of the deepest and most philosophically challenging dimensions of the forest's ecology. The Amazon is full of manipulators and manipulated, full of organisms that have evolved not just to survive themselves, but to redirect the actions of others toward their own ends. It is a world where the boundaries between self and other, between your own behavior and the behavior imposed on you by another organism's evolutionary strategy, are considerably less clear than they might appear. The kangaroo catfish represents another dimension of biological influence in the Amazon's aquatic environment, one that is arguably even more intimate in its parasitic strategy, though far simpler in its mechanism than the extraordinary neural manipulation of the Ophiocordyceps fungi. The kangaroo, sometimes called the toothpick fish, is a small catfish belonging to the family Trichomycteridae, and it exists within one of the most specialized ecological niches in the Amazon: parasitism of larger fish through gill intrusion. The kangaroo in its various species has evolved a body plan and a behavioral strategy specifically designed to enter the gill chambers of larger host fish, attach itself to the gill tissue, and feed on the blood of its host. The body of the kangaroo is long and slender, almost eel-like in its proportions, and transparent enough that the fish is nearly invisible in the water column. Its head bears backward-pointing spines that, once the fish has entered the gill chamber of a host and has extended them, prevent withdrawal. It enters by following the current of water flowing through the gills of a larger fish, which is a stream of water flowing outward as the host breathes. The kangaroo swims against this current and into the gill chamber, where it uses its spines to anchor itself, pierces the gill tissue with its teeth, and begins to feed on the blood of the host. The parasitic strategy of the kangaroo is elegant in its simplicity compared to the behavioral manipulation of the Ophiocordyceps fungi, but it is sophisticated in its ecological refinement. The fish has evolved a body plan precisely calibrated for this mode of life, slender enough to enter gill chambers, flexible enough to navigate within them, equipped with exactly the anchoring and feeding apparatus needed to exploit this particular resource. It detects its hosts through chemical signals, specifically the ammonia and urea in the water that flows through fish gills, and it has, in its multiple species, a range of host preferences and a range of body sizes corresponding to the different sizes of gill chambers found in different host species. The relationship between the kangaroo and its fish hosts is a straightforward parasitism, with the kangaroo extracting blood from its host while causing injury and potentially secondary infections at the attachment site. Large host fish rarely die from a single kangaroo attachment, but the wounds created can be significant, and in environments where kangaroo populations are high and fish populations are concentrated, the cumulative parasitic load on individual large fish can be substantial. What makes the kangaroo ecologically interesting beyond its individual parasitic relationship with host fish is its role in the Amazon's aquatic food web. By targeting the gills of large fish, the kangaroo effectively taxes these large predators, reducing their condition and potentially their efficiency as hunters. If large predatory fish in the Amazon carry significant kangaroo loads, their effectiveness as top predators may be modestly reduced, which could have small but real effects on the prey fish populations they hunt. The kangaroo is not simply a parasite with no broader ecological significance. It is a link in a web of interactions that extends far beyond the simple relationship between a small bloodsucker and its individual hosts. The diversity of the Trichomycteridae family, the family to which the kangaroo belongs, gives us a window into the evolutionary pathway by which this extremely specialized parasitic strategy developed. Not all members of the family are parasitic in the same way. Some are free-living predators of invertebrates. Others are facultative parasites, able to feed parasitically, but also to exploit other food sources. The most highly specialized kangaroo species represent the endpoint of an evolutionary trajectory in which the gill intrusion strategy has been refined over many generations to the point where the fish is almost entirely dependent on it, physiologically and behaviorally adapted to a mode of life that would be impossible for a less specialized fish. This evolutionary trajectory, from generalist to specialist, from opportunistic to obligate, is a common pattern in the Amazon, repeated across dozens of taxonomic groups in dozens of ecological contexts. The pressure of competition in a highly diverse ecosystem with many species exploiting many different resources pushes lineages toward increasingly specialized niches because specialization reduces competition with other species. The most specialized species are not more primitive or more simple than the generalists. They are more derived, more refined, the products of more generations of selection for specific adaptations. They are, in a sense, the most thoroughly Amazon-made creatures in the forest, shaped most completely by the specific pressures of this specific place. As the afternoon advances and the light in the understory begins to shift, becoming, if anything, even dimmer and more amber-tinted as the sun moves lower in the sky, and more of its light travels through greater thicknesses of leaf and branch to reach us, the forest around us begins to change character. The diurnal community, the birds and butterflies and monkeys and lizards that have been active through the day, begins to settle and quiet. There's a period of transition, a brief window between the activity patterns of the day community and the night community, when the forest seems to hold its breath. This transition period is when you begin to notice things you could not see before. A pale shape on a branch that resolves as your eyes adjust into the roosting form of a potu, perfectly still, perfectly integrated into the broken wood of its perch. A toad that has been sitting motionless under a leaf all day and now begins, almost imperceptibly, to shift its weight. A pair of large compound eyes in the dark of a hollow tree that catch what little light remains and return it as two brief sparks before closing again. The Amazon night is a world that most visitors never experience, and that even most researchers rarely spend sufficient time in to appreciate its full character. Nocturnal in the Amazon does not simply mean the same forest with the lights off. It means a fundamentally different community of organisms, adapted to different sensory environments, exploiting different resources, facing different predators, operating at different scales and with different strategies than their diurnal counterparts. The nighttime Amazon is not the shadow of the daytime Amazon. It is another Amazon, layered over the same physical space, sharing the same trees and leaf surfaces and river margins, but inhabiting a different dimension of time and sensory reality. We will spend the night in the Amazon in considerable depth later in this documentary. But before darkness fully arrives, before we make that transition, there is one more creature we should spend time with in the fading light, one more demonstration of the extraordinary sensory sophistication that the Amazon has demanded of its inhabitants. The pink river dolphin, known locally as the bodo, is one of the most unique and surprising animals in the Amazon river system. It is a freshwater dolphin, one of only a few species of river dolphins remaining in the world, and its relationship to the Amazon is so deep and so specific that it has, over millions of years of freshwater isolation, become something profoundly different from its oceanic relatives. The bodo is the largest river dolphin in the world, reaching lengths of 2.5 meters and weights of up to 200 kilograms. Its distinctive pink coloration, particularly striking in older males, is not pigmentation in the traditional sense, but rather the result of blood vessels close to the skin surface, combined with a reduction in the melanin that would otherwise darken the skin. The effect is remarkable, a large aquatic mammal moving through brown and green water in shades of pale pink and cream, turning a deep rose color in excitement or exertion as blood flow to the skin increases. The bodo's anatomy reflects millions of years of adaptation to river environments. Unlike oceanic dolphins, whose vertebrae are fused into a rigid backbone optimized for high-speed straight-line pursuit, the bodo has unfused vertebrae in its neck, giving it the ability to turn its head up to 90 degrees. This flexibility is enormously valuable in the flooded forest environment, where the dolphin must maneuver around tree trunks, through submerged root systems, between branches, and along the complex topography of the flooded forest floor. A rigid-necked dolphin could not hunt effectively in this environment. The boto's neck flexibility makes it a capable hunter in spaces that would be inaccessible to more rigid cetacean bodies. The boto's echolocation system is among the most sophisticated and versatile of any cetacean, and this sophistication is directly related to the complexity of the environment in which it operates. Echolocation, the production of sound pulses and the interpretation of their echoes to form a three-dimensional map of the surrounding environment, is common in cetaceans. Oceanic dolphins use it effectively in open water, where echoes return from relatively simple targets against a background of open space. The boto uses it in an environment of almost unimaginable acoustic complexity. Consider what the flooded forest represents as an echolocation environment. Tree trunks of varying diameter, at varying distances, at various angles, root systems of complex branching geometry, submerged logs on the forest floor. Living branches, dead branches, lianas, seeds, floating debris, schools of fish moving in complex, rapidly changing formations. The acoustic environment of the flooded forest is a cacophony of echo returns from dozens of different surfaces simultaneously, all overlapping in time and frequency in ways that would overwhelm a less sophisticated echolocation system. The boto navigates this acoustic chaos through a combination of technological and behavioral sophistication. Its melon, the fatty organ in the forehead that focuses the outgoing sound beam, is more flexible and more mobile than that of most oceanic dolphins, allowing the boto to direct its echolocation beam with considerable precision rather than simply broadcasting in a fixed direction. Its lower jaw, through which echolocation returns are transmitted to the inner ear, contains fat-filled channels that function as acoustic receivers with high sensitivity and broad directional coverage. Together, these anatomical features give the boto an echolocation system of exceptional resolution and flexibility, but the boto's sophistication as a navigator of the flooded forest goes beyond its hardware. The behavioral strategies it employs in using its echolocation system are also remarkable. Botos have been observed actively probing specific microhabitats with focused echolocation beams, directing their clicks at the bases of submerged tree roots, into the spaces beneath floating vegetation mats, into the dark hollow spaces created by submerged logs and branches. They are not simply broadcasting and listening for returns. They are actively interrogating specific targets, sending focused queries into specific spaces, and interpreting the detailed echo patterns that return. The prey the boto seeks in the flooded forest includes a remarkable diversity of fish species. The boto is an opportunistic generalist predator, capable of taking fish from small tetras to large armored catfish, including species with heavy bony plates that present a real physical challenge to a predator with soft jaws. The boto has responded to this dietary diversity with an unusual jaw anatomy for a dolphin, more flexible, with a greater range of jaw gape, and with teeth that vary along the length of the jaw, from conical catching teeth at the front to flatter, more molariform teeth toward the back that are capable of crushing the armored prey that the boto occasionally takes. One of the most interesting aspects of boto behavior is the evidence for individual specialization within the species. Different individual dolphins in a population appear to develop different hunting strategies and different prey preferences, possibly related to the particular microhabitats they frequent and the particular prey communities those microhabitats contain. This individual variation in hunting strategy, beyond what would be expected from individual differences in body size or age, suggests a capacity for individual learning and behavioral flexibility in the boto that goes beyond the stereotyped responses of many aquatic predators. The boto's social life is considerably less structured than that of most oceanic dolphins. Botos are generally seen as solitary or in small, loose groupings, without the tight, stable social bonds and complex social hierarchies found in species like bottlenose dolphins or orcas. But they do show evidence of social learning, with juveniles observed following and apparently learning from adults during hunting sequences. And they do aggregate, sometimes in larger numbers, at particularly rich feeding sites, particularly during the dry season when fish concentrations in shrinking water bodies bring multiple individual dolphins to the same productive areas. The Bodo's relationship with human communities along the Amazon River is complex and deeply embedded in the cultural fabric of the region. In many Amazonian communities, the Bodo is the center of a rich mythological tradition, attributed with supernatural powers and the ability to transform into human form. These traditions have, historically, provided a degree of cultural protection for the dolphins, as killing a Bodo was considered to bring bad luck or supernatural consequences. The cultural integration of this animal into the worldview of the people who share its rivers is itself a fascinating example of how the natural world and human culture can interact over long periods of shared proximity. As the light fades from the flooded forest and the reflections of the trees in the dark water around us deepen and multiply, the occasional exhalation of a Bodo, its breath a soft pneumatic sound that carries across the surface of the still water, reminds us that we are not alone in this space. There is something moving in the dark water around the tree trunks, something that knows this flooded world in 3 dimensions, that reads it in sound and echo, that has been navigating it in exactly this way for longer than our species has existed. The Bodo is not a vestige or a relic, though it is ancient in lineage. It is a fully contemporary creature, adapted to its world with extraordinary precision, doing something in this flooded forest that nothing else in the world does in quite the same way. The Amazon night arrives not gradually, but as if a switch has been thrown. The transition from the last amber light of late afternoon to genuine darkness in the understory happens quickly, because the canopy overhead blocks most of the sky, and once direct sunlight is gone, there is almost nothing to replace it. The stars are invisible beneath the canopy. The moon, on those nights when it is visible at all, is nothing more than an occasional flicker of pale light through a gap in the leaves high above. In this darkness, the forest does not go silent, it changes voice. The diurnal chorus of birds fades, and in its place rises a different acoustic world. The rhythmic stridulation of thousands of insects, the calls of nocturnal frogs and toads in dozens of overlapping frequencies, the occasional resonant hoot of an owl somewhere in the middle canopy, the strange, ventriloquial sounds of the potu which has emerged from its daylight stillness into its nighttime hunting mode, its calls carrying across the dark understory in a way that makes it almost impossible to determine where they originate. The description of the Amazon night as layered in time captures something important about the temporal structure of the forest's ecology. The forest is not a single community that alternates between active and inactive states with the day-night cycle. It is multiple overlapping communities that take turns inhabiting the same physical spaces, each community adapted to the specific conditions of its particular temporal window, each exploiting resources and relationships that are available only within that window. This temporal partitioning is, in evolutionary terms, a strategy for reducing competition. If the resources of a given habitat are shared between a diurnal and a nocturnal community, then the competition for those resources is reduced because the two communities are rarely in direct conflict. The diurnal hummingbird and the nocturnal moth may both visit the same flowers and extract the same nectar, but they do so at different times, reducing the degree to which they compete directly for this resource. The plants, for their part, have often evolved floral characteristics that cater specifically to their particular pollinator communities, with day-flowering plants typically offering visual cues and colors that diurnal pollinators can detect, while night-flowering plants often produce powerful scents that carry in the dark and guide nocturnal pollinators by smell rather than sight. But temporal partitioning is not just about reducing competition. It is also about avoiding predation. For many small animals in the Amazon, the choice between diurnal and nocturnal activity is fundamentally a choice between different sets of predators with different sensory systems and different hunting strategies. A small mammal that is active during the day faces visual predators, primarily birds of prey with exceptional vision and aerial hunting capability. The same mammal, if it shifts its activity to nighttime, avoids most aerial predators but faces a different set of risks from nocturnal hunters that have evolved in the low-light environment. The nocturnal hunters of the Amazon canopy are, by necessity, animals whose sensory systems have been reshaped by selection for performance in darkness. Owls are the most obvious example, and the Amazon hosts a remarkable diversity of owl species ranging from the tiny, insect-hunting ferruginous pygmy owl to the enormous harpy owl's nocturnal counterpart, the spectacled owl, whose great disc-shaped facial structure collects and focuses whatever ambient light and sound is available with extraordinary efficiency. But owls are not the only nocturnal hunters in the canopy. The tyra, a large member of the weasel family, may hunt at night in addition to its diurnal activity. Ocelots and margays, the smaller spotted cats of the Amazon, are primarily nocturnal, using their large eyes, sensitive whiskers, and exceptional climbing ability to hunt through the forest at night in ways that their diurnal competitors cannot match. The margay is particularly remarkable in that it has evolved ankle joints capable of rotating 180 degrees, allowing it to descend tree trunks head first, a capability shared by very few mammals and one that gives it access to hunting opportunities unavailable to less physically flexible predators. The prey animals of the nighttime Amazon have, correspondingly, evolved sensory systems and behavioral strategies calibrated for survival in darkness. Many small nocturnal mammals have enormous eyes, maximizing light capture in low-light conditions. Many frogs and insects have evolved chemical defenses, distasteful or toxic compounds in their skin or tissues, which serve as predator deterrents in an environment where visual warning coloration is less effective because potential predators cannot see color clearly in darkness. And many nocturnal insects and frogs have evolved bioluminescence, the biological production of light, as a communication tool whose effectiveness is actually enhanced by the very darkness that makes other communication modalities more difficult. Bioluminescence in the Amazon is more widespread than most people realize. Fireflies, which use bioluminescence for mate attraction, are present in substantial diversity, and their flashing displays in forest clearings and river margins on dark nights create light shows of considerable beauty. Certain fungi produce a persistent bioluminescent glow, the phenomenon known as foxfire, which illuminates the forest floor with a pale green light on very dark nights. The purpose of fungal bioluminescence is debated among researchers, with hypotheses ranging from attraction of spore-dispersing insects to simple metabolic byproduct to possible thermal regulation effects, and the truth likely varies between different bioluminescent fungal species. Some bioluminescent insects use their light production not for communication but for deterrence, flashing their lights when threatened to startle potential predators, or, in some cases, producing light patterns that mimic the warning signals of other bioluminescent organisms known to be distasteful or toxic. The exploitation of bioluminescence for deceptive signaling, for mimicking the warning signals of defended species, represents yet another dimension of the Amazon's rich tradition of visual deception, carried into the nighttime world through the one visual medium that remains effective in darkness: self-generated light. The forest floor at night is a world of remarkable sensory richness if you have the right sensory systems to perceive it. The chemical signals that saturate the air of the forest, scent marks, pheromone trails, the volatile compounds released by flowers and decaying matter in living animals, are produced continuously regardless of light level, and are perceived by the enormous diversity of nocturnal insects, reptiles, and mammals that navigate the forest chemically rather than visually. A caiman lying motionless in the shallows of a blackwater stream at night is not blind to its environment. It reads it through its chemosensory systems with a precision that is, in its own way, as sophisticated as the visual hunting of a diurnal raptor. Pit vipers, some of the most formidable nocturnal hunters of the Amazon forest floor, navigate their nighttime world through a combination of their standard sensory systems and a remarkable addition, infrared detection. The heat-sensing pit organs that give pit vipers their name are located between the eye and the nostril, and they are exquisitely sensitive to the heat signatures of warm-blooded prey. A fer-de-lance lying motionless on the forest floor at night is not waiting randomly or hoping for the chance arrival of prey. It is actively scanning its thermal environment, detecting the infrared radiation emitted by any warm-blooded animal within a certain distance, building a thermal image of its surroundings that guides its strike with precision, even in total darkness. The convergence of so many different sensory systems in the nighttime Amazon, thermal detection, electroreception, echolocation, chemoreception, bioluminescence, represents the diversity of evolutionary solutions to a single challenge: how to operate effectively in the absence of the visual information that drives so much of the diurnal world's ecology. Each solution is different. Each is calibrated for the specific sensory challenges and opportunities of the particular ecological niche its possessor occupies. And together they create a nighttime world of extraordinary complexity and richness, a world that is every bit as structured, every bit as ecologically dynamic, and every bit as biologically sophisticated as the daytime Amazon, simply operating through different means and perceived through different senses. As the night progresses in the Amazon, there is a quality to the darkness that visitors consistently comment on. It is not merely dark, it is dense. The air itself seems to have weight and presence in a way that is difficult to describe but easy to feel. The humidity is near total, and the warmth of the day lingers in the vegetation and the soil, radiating back slowly into the night air. The sounds of the forest come and go in patterns that feel almost structured, waves of cricket sound building and subsiding, a frog chorus rising to a peak somewhere along the river margin, and then falling back as if on a signal, an owl's call rippling outward through the dark and provoking a cascade of momentary silence in the insects nearest to it before the sound returns. It is in moments like this that the sheer scale of the Amazon's biological complexity becomes most palpable. Every sound represents a species, and every species represents an evolutionary history that extends back millions of years through this specific landscape, shaped by the specific conditions of this specific place. The cricket chirping in the darkness has ancestors that were chirping in versions of this forest for longer than the human lineage has existed. The frog calling from its leaf above the stream is expressing a genetic program for sound production that was refined over millions of generations of mate choice and predator avoidance and acoustic niche partitioning until it reached its present form. Every creature in this nighttime forest is the end product of an incomprehensibly long process of refinement, and the forest itself is the environment that drove and directed that refinement. There is something profound about sitting in this darkness and appreciating that fact. The Amazon is not simply a collection of impressive creatures that happen to live in the same place. It is a system, an integrated, self-perpetuating, self-regulating system of relationships and feedbacks and co-evolutionary processes that has been operating continuously for so long that it has reached a level of complexity that genuinely defies comprehensive human understanding. Every relationship we have examined, every predator-prey interaction, every parasitic strategy, Every communication system, every sensory adaptation is embedded in dozens or hundreds of other relationships, connected to every other aspect of the system in ways that we have only partially mapped. The scientists who study the Amazon are, by necessity, specialists. They focus on particular species, particular ecological relationships, particular environmental questions. No single researcher can encompass the full complexity of the system, and no single research program can address more than a small subset of the questions the Amazon raises. The understanding we have of this forest has been built up piece by piece, observation by observation, over centuries of natural history documentation and decades of modern ecological research, and it remains, even now, more a sketch than a portrait. The Amazon resists comprehensive understanding not through any mystical property, but through sheer, staggering biological complexity. This is part of why the process of scientific discovery in the Amazon continues with such remarkable regularity. New species continue to be described from this forest at a rate that would be considered extraordinary in any other region of the world. Not just insects and invertebrates, where new species are to be expected given the sheer number of small creatures packed into the forest, but vertebrates, new fish species, new frog species, new lizard species, and occasionally, even new mammals and birds. The frequency of new species discovery reflects not a sudden increase in the diversity of the Amazon, but a gradual, ongoing improvement in our ability to access its more remote and difficult areas, and to apply the analytical tools necessary to distinguish one cryptic species from another. Cryptic species, species that are effectively identical in external appearance to their close relatives, but are genetically distinct and reproductively isolated, are particularly common in the Amazon. The high rates of endemism, the extraordinary local variation in community composition from one location to another separated by only moderate distances, and the numerous physical barriers to gene flow created by rivers, terrain, and historical climate fluctuations, have all contributed to the generation of numerous lineages that diverged from common ancestors, but retained similar ecological roles and similar morphological appearances. Only modern genetic analysis can reliably distinguish many of these cryptic species from each other, and the application of DNA-based methods to Amazon biodiversity has, over the past several decades, revealed that the actual diversity of the forest is substantially higher than even the most generous traditional estimates suggested. The implications of this ongoing discovery are significant. Every new species described is a new data point in our understanding of the evolutionary history of the Amazon. Every new relationship identified between species is a new element in our model of how the ecosystem functions. And every new understanding of ecosystem function helps us appreciate more fully the degree to which the Amazon operates as an integrated whole rather than as a collection of independent parts. As our first extended journey through the Amazon approaches the transition that will carry us into the second half of our exploration, it is worth pausing to reflect on what we have seen and what it tells us about the nature of this place. We began at the top, in the structural overview of the forest, understanding its layered architecture and its role in generating its own climate through the biology of its trees. We descended through the canopy layers and settled in the understory, where we explored the extraordinary strategies of concealment that have evolved in response to the relentless selection pressure of predation. We met the Potu, whose performance of dead wood is so complete that it includes seeing slits in its eyelids to maintain surveillance while appearing inanimate. We met the glass frog, whose transparency exploits the optics of edge detection in ways that turn the apparent handicap of being see-through into a sophisticated visual camouflage system. We explored communication in the acoustic environment of the forest, appreciating the structured complexity of the Amazon soundscape and the ways in which different species have carved out acoustic niches within it. We descended into the water and encountered the electric eel, whose electrical sense serves simultaneously for navigation, prey detection, and social coordination during group hunts of extraordinary sophistication. We considered the kangaroo, whose parasitic specialization is a paradigm case of niche specialization driven by the competitive pressures of a hyperdiverse ecosystem. We spent time with the manipulators, the Ophiocordyceps fungi, whose pharmacological control of ant behavior is one of the most sophisticated and unsettling host-parasite interactions in the living world, a system in which the evolutionary arms race between parasite and host has produced adaptations of stunning precision on both sides. We drifted through the flooded forest with the pink river dolphin, appreciating the combination of anatomical flexibility and echolocation sophistication that allows this animal to hunt effectively in one of the most acoustically complex environments imaginable. And we sat in the dark, listening to the Amazon night, beginning to appreciate the temporal layering of the forest's ecology and the diverse sensory strategies that nocturnal species have evolved to operate in the absence of light. All of these things, all of these creatures and strategies and relationships are connected. They are part of a single system whose interconnections run deeper and wider than any individual observation can reveal. The frog whose concealment keeps it safe from predators is connected to the insect population that the frog consumes, and the insect population is connected to the plant community whose leaves and flowers the insects depend upon. And the plant community is connected to the fungal networks in the soil that help plants exchange nutrients and water, and those fungal networks include species that parasitize insects as well as species that cooperate with plant roots. And the whole system is bound together by flows of water and nutrients and energy that cycle through the living tissues of the forest and back through the soil, and the rivers and the atmosphere in loops that have been operating, without interruption, for longer than the human mind can meaningfully encompass. The Amazon is a system that has been solving the problem of life on Earth for a very long time. The solutions it has found are not the only possible solutions, but they are among the most refined, the most complex, and the most deeply interconnected solutions that life has produced anywhere on this planet. Understanding them is not just an exercise in natural history, though it is that. It is an exercise in understanding what life is capable of when it is given enough time, enough space, and enough diversity of challenge to develop its full potential. In the second part of this journey, we will go deeper. We will follow the scientists into the forest and understand the challenges of research in an environment of this complexity. We will explore more of the nocturnal world, spending the full Amazon night with creatures whose strategies for survival push the limits of biological possibility. We will return to the rivers and follow them to their connections with the flooded forest, watching the Amazon's ecology shift and transform with the seasonal rhythms of flood and recession that drive the entire system's dynamics. And we will grapple with the deepest question that the Amazon raises. What does it mean to try to understand a system of this complexity? And what is our responsibility toward a world that we can only partially perceive? For now, the darkness deepens. Somewhere out in the flooded forest, the exhalation of a bodo ripples the dark surface of the water. A potu calls once, twice, and falls silent. The insect chorus rises and falls like the breathing of the forest itself. And the Amazon continues, as it has always continued, running its ancient programs of survival and reproduction and competition and cooperation in the darkness, regardless of whether anyone is watching or listening or trying to understand. It does not need to be understood to function, but we need to understand it as much as we can, because what happens in this forest matters to everything else, to every other piece of the planetary system in which we and the forest and the dolphins and the glass frogs and the electric eels all together exist. The Amazon is not separate from our world, it is part of it. A part that breathes, that communicates, that manipulates, that conceals, that hunts in darkness by electrical field and echo and infrared signature, that recycles death into life at a rate that keeps an entire continent's climate stable and an entire ocean's chemistry influenced. This is what we have begun to explore, and there is so much more to discover. we left the Amazon in darkness. We left it breathing, calling, hunting through the night with senses that have no equivalent in the human experience, navigating a world of electrical fields and sound echoes and thermal signatures and chemical traces that together compose a reality as rich and as structured as anything the daylight world contains, simply invisible to eyes that evolved under different conditions and in different places. Now the light is returning. Not dramatically, not with the sudden, sharp sunrise of open landscapes and clear skies. In the Amazon, dawn is a gradual thing, a slow infiltration of gray into the blackness, a softening of the darkness rather than a replacement of it. The canopy overhead begins to separate from the sky above it as the first light distinguishes one from the other. And with the light comes sound, a dawn chorus of such extraordinary complexity and volume that it constitutes one of the most remarkable acoustic events that occurs with regularity anywhere on Earth. The dawn chorus of the Amazon rainforest is not simply birds singing. It is an entire community of organisms that have spent the night in varying degrees of activity and alertness now signaling their presence, establishing their positions, competing for acoustic space, and communicating across the full vertical range of the forest, from the forest floor to the emergent trees above the canopy, simultaneously. The first calls begin before there is any visible light, birds whose circadian rhythms are sensitive enough to begin the morning program in response to changes in the electromagnetic environment that precede visible dawn by many minutes. These early callers are answered by others, and the chorus builds in layers, each species adding its voice to the acoustic landscape in a sequence that is, remarkably, consistent from morning to morning within a given location. Researchers who have spent extended periods recording the Amazon dawn chorus have noted that this consistency is not random. The sequence in which species begin calling follows a pattern that reflects the particular sensory capabilities of each species, specifically their visual threshold, the minimum light level at which they can see well enough to resume activity. Species with larger eyes and more sensitive visual systems begin earlier, when ambient light is still minimal. Species with smaller eyes and less sensitive visual systems begin later, when more light has accumulated. The result is a cascade of voices that tracks the progression of dawn with a precision that reflects millions of years of evolutionary calibration to the specific light environment of this particular forest. This morning observation gives us an important entry point into one of the central themes of the second half of our exploration: the precision with which living systems in the Amazon are calibrated to specific environmental conditions. We have already seen this precision in the concealment strategies of the potu and the glass frog. We have seen it in the electrical hunting system of the electric eel and the echolocation sophistication of the bodo. Now we are going to pursue this theme of precision and calibration into some of the Amazon's most complex and most scientifically challenging ecological relationships. And we are going to do something else. We are going to spend time with the people who study this forest professionally, who have dedicated years and careers to trying to understand it, and we are going to be honest about what that process of understanding actually looks like in practice. Because scientific knowledge of the Amazon has a character that is quite different from the confident, polished presentations that most nature documentaries offer. It is fragmentary, incremental, contested, frequently revised, and always provisional. It is built from brief encounters and fragmented evidence and the patient accumulation of observations made under conditions of extraordinary logistical difficulty. And understanding the nature of that knowledge is as important as understanding the specific things we know. The challenges of conducting scientific research in the Amazon are not simply logistical inconveniences. They are fundamental constraints that shape the character of what can be known and how it can be known, and they have produced a scientific tradition of working with incomplete data, partial observations, and carefully qualified conclusions that is, in its own way, as sophisticated as the biological systems being studied. consider the basic challenge of accessing the forest. The Amazon basin is vast, and large portions of it are accessible only by river or by small aircraft to airstrips that serve as jumping-off points for overland expeditions that may involve days of travel through dense vegetation. The rivers themselves, while they provide access routes, also present significant hazards. Seasonal flooding that changes water levels by meters over the course of weeks, strong currents in main channels, the constant navigation challenges of debris-laden water in flood season, and the ever-present biological hazards of a river system that contains more than 1,000 fish species, significant populations of large caimans, anacondas of substantial size, and various other organisms whose interactions with human researchers can range from inconvenient to dangerous. Once in the forest, the density of the vegetation creates visibility constraints that make direct observation of most species extremely difficult. A researcher in the Amazon understory may have clear sight lines of only a few meters in any direction. The canopy, where a substantial fraction of the forest's biodiversity is concentrated, is tens of meters above the ground and requires specialized climbing equipment or the construction of canopy platforms to access directly. The forest floor, where another large fraction of biological activity occurs, is often obscured by leaf litter, root structures, and low vegetation that makes movement difficult and observation of specific targets, a matter of patience and luck as much as skill and technique. The humidity presents its own research challenges. Electronic equipment fails in the near-total humidity of the Amazon understory with a regularity that would be considered catastrophic in other environments. Camera equipment, recording devices, GPS units, computing equipment, all of it requires constant maintenance and protection against the moisture that permeates everything in the forest. Field notebooks must be written in pencil or with waterproof ink because regular pens fail immediately. Samples must be preserved rapidly against the fungal and bacterial decomposition that begins within hours of collection in the warm, humid environment. And there is the simple challenge of finding what you're looking for. The Amazon's extraordinary biodiversity means that any given species is typically present at relatively low population densities across a large geographic area. Finding a specific species in a specific location requires either extensive prior knowledge of its habits and habitat preferences or a substantial investment of time in systematic searching. Animals that are cryptic, nocturnal, or otherwise difficult to detect may be present in a habitat for years without being documented by researchers working in that area. The first record of a species in a particular location does not indicate that the species was absent before the observation was made. It indicates that sufficient observation was made to document its presence for the first time. This fundamental limitation of detection probability shapes the entire scientific literature on Amazon biodiversity in ways that are important to understand. When researchers describe a species as rare in the Amazon, they are often describing rarity of detection rather than rarity of true population density. Many species that appear infrequently in collection records are abundant in the forest, but have ecologies that make them extremely difficult to document. Conversely, species that appear frequently in collections are not necessarily more abundant than cryptic ones, but simply more detectable, more likely to be encountered by standard collection methods. The implications of detection probability limitations extend to understanding Amazon biodiversity as a whole. Current estimates of the total number of species in the Amazon basin range widely, and the uncertainty in these estimates reflects not ignorance about particular species, but fundamental uncertainty about what fraction of the total species pool has been documented at all. For insects, the most speciose group in the forest, the documented fraction of the true species total is probably quite small. For vertebrates, the documented fraction is higher but still incomplete. For microorganisms, the documented fraction is almost certainly a tiny sliver of the actual diversity present. This is not a failure of Amazon science. It is a reflection of the genuine scale and complexity of the system being studied. The Amazon is simply bigger and more diverse than the collective capacity of the scientific community to document it comprehensively, even with modern tools and sustained effort. Every year brings new species descriptions and new discoveries, but every year also brings a clearer appreciation of how much remains unknown. The frontier of discovery in the Amazon does not recede as scientists advance. It expands, revealing more complexity the more carefully it is examined. There are researchers who have spent decades working in specific locations within the Amazon, building up a long-term knowledge of those particular systems that gives their work a depth and context that shorter studies cannot match. Long-term ecological research in the Amazon is some of the most valuable scientific work being done anywhere in the world, precisely because the processes that shape this ecosystem operate on timescales that exceed the typical duration of a research grant or a doctoral program. Forest dynamics in the Amazon, the processes of tree growth, mortality, gap formation, and regeneration that continuously reshape the structure of the forest, operate on timescales of decades to centuries. Understanding these dynamics requires observations made over multiple decades, documenting the same trees and the same plots year after year, tracking the fate of individual trees, and measuring the changes in community composition and forest structure that accumulate gradually over long periods. Research programs that have been doing this kind of work for several decades have produced some of the most important insights into how the Amazon functions and how it responds to variation in climate and other environmental factors. What these long-term studies have revealed is a forest in continuous motion, never static, never finished, always in the process of becoming something slightly different than what it was before. Individual trees live and die on timescales of years to centuries, depending on their species and size. The gaps created by falling trees are hotspots of ecological activity, bathed in the direct sunlight that penetrates through the opening in the canopy, colonized rapidly by fast-growing pioneer species that exploit the temporary resource abundance of the gap before the slower-growing but ultimately taller canopy trees close the opening again. The forest as a whole is a mosaic of patches in different stages of this gap-filling cycle, creating a structural diversity that adds another dimension to the already extraordinary biological diversity of the system. The dynamics of seed dispersal and seedling establishment in the Amazon are among the most complex ecological processes studied by researchers in the forest, and they illustrate beautifully the extent to which the Amazon is a system of integrated relationships rather than a collection of independent species. Many of the Amazon's large seeded trees depend on specific animal dispersers to move their seeds away from the parent tree. Close to the parent, seeds face intense competition from the seedlings of the parent itself and from soil-borne pathogens that accumulate in high densities under productive individuals. Being moved away from the parent, even a short distance, dramatically increases a seedling's probability of survival. The animals that disperse these seeds are not interchangeable. Different tree species have evolved fruit characteristics, size, color, nutritional composition, timing of fruiting that attract specific sets of dispersers. Large seeded fruits are typically dispersed by large animals, tapirs, large primates, large-bodied birds like toucans, and large cotingas, because only these animals can swallow or otherwise handle seeds of the relevant size. If the animal dispersers of a particular tree species are removed from a forest, the regeneration of that tree species is compromised, even if the trees themselves are still present and producing seeds. The seeds simply accumulate under the parent trees, where their probability of successful establishment is very low. This dependency of plant species on specific animal dispersers creates a web of ecological dependency that extends across the entire forest. The plants depend on the animals for seed movement. The animals depend on the plants for fruit and seed resources, remove either partner and the other is diminished. The integrity of the forest as a regenerating system depends on the presence and abundance of both the plant community and the animal community that services it, and the disruption of either has consequences that ripple through the entire web of dependencies in ways that can be difficult to predict, and that may not become apparent until years or decades after the initial disruption. This interconnectedness of the Amazon's ecological relationships is one of the most important things that long-term research has revealed, and it has profound implications for how we think about the forest as a system. The Amazon is not simply a collection of species that happen to occupy the same geographic space. It is a community of deeply interdependent organisms whose relationships have co-evolved over millions of years into a system of mutual dependency, so extensive that virtually every species is connected through chains of interaction to virtually every other species in the community. The forest functions as a whole, and its health as a whole depends on the maintenance of its parts in a way that is far more intimate and far more consequential than the simple species diversity statistics suggest. Returning now to the living forest, to the specific creatures and specific strategies that make the Amazon so extraordinary, let us follow the dawn light as it gradually strengthens and the nighttime community retreats to its daytime refuges. In their place, emerging from roosts and resting places and burrows, comes the daytime Amazon, and among its most spectacular and most scientifically interesting inhabitants are the creatures of the canopy, which we have so far only glimpsed from below. The canopy of the Amazon is, in the literal sense, another world. It is a world of abundant light and relatively open space compared to the dim understory below. It is a world of wind and temperature variation, of dramatic daily cycles of heating and cooling, of exposure to rain and direct sunlight that the understory never experiences. It is a world connected horizontally across vast distances by the bridges of interlocking branches and crossing lianas, and it is a world that has been, for most of the history of Amazon research, extremely difficult to access and study directly. Modern canopy research has opened this world to scientific investigation through the development of specialized equipment and techniques: canopy cranes, rope ascent systems, aerial walkways, canopy platforms, and most recently, drone-based observation platforms that allow researchers to survey canopy structure and activity from above without disturbing the canopy community below. What these studies have revealed is a world of extraordinary richness and complexity that rivals, and in some taxonomic groups exceeds, the biological diversity of the forest floor and understory. The canopy epiphyte community, the plants that grow on the branches and trunks of canopy trees rather than in soil, is itself a world of remarkable diversity and complexity. Bromeliads, orchids, ferns, mosses, lichens, and dozens of other plant groups have colonized every available surface in the canopy, exploiting the abundant light of this elevated zone while finding creative solutions to the challenge of accessing water and nutrients without connection to the soil. Bromeliads in particular have evolved a strategy of remarkable efficiency, forming a rosette of tightly overlapping leaves that creates a central tank which collects rainwater and accumulates organic debris. This tank becomes a miniature aquatic habitat, hosting communities of insects, frogs, invertebrates, and microorganisms that live their entire lives within the few hundred milliliters of water held between the bromeliad's leaves. The bromeliad tank ecosystem is a perfect demonstration of the Amazon's tendency to create biological complexity within biological complexity, nesting ecosystems within ecosystems in a fractal-like recursion that seems to have no lower limit of scale. Within a single canopy tree, dozens or hundreds of bromeliads might be growing, each one a self-contained aquatic world, each one supporting a distinct community of organisms many of which are found nowhere else, specialists so precisely adapted to the specific conditions of the bromeliad tank habitat that they cannot survive outside it. The canopy tree is not simply a tree. It is a habitat supporting a community of species more diverse than many entire ecosystems in less biologically productive parts of the world. The tree frogs that use bromeliad tanks for reproduction are among the most specialized and most studied inhabitants of the canopy ecosystem. Many species of dendrobatid frogs, the poison dart frogs, have evolved reproductive strategies centered specifically on the bromeliad tank habitat. A female will lay eggs in a moist terrestrial location, typically among leaf litter or on a moist surface near the base of a bromeliad, and the male will guard them until they hatch. The hatched tadpoles then climb onto the back of the male, who carries them up the tree to a bromeliad tank, depositing one tadpole per tank in some species, to avoid the intense competition that would occur if multiple tadpoles shared the limited resources of a single tank. In some species, the female returns periodically to each bromeliad tank where she has deposited a tadpole and lays unfertilized eggs into the tank as food for the developing tadpole. This behavior requires the female to remember the locations of multiple individual bromeliads within the canopy, to monitor the developmental stage of the tadpoles she has placed in each, and to time her provisioning visits to provide food at the right intervals for tadpoles at different stages of development. The cognitive demands of this behavior, for an animal with a brain the size of a grain of rice, are substantial, and the performance of this task by female dendrobatids is one of the more remarkable demonstrations of the cognitive capacity hidden within a tiny body in this forest. The poison dart frogs are also relevant to our earlier theme of concealment and its alternatives, because they represent one of the most striking inversions of the concealment strategy we have examined. Rather than hiding, rather than matching their background and reducing their detectability, poison dart frogs are conspicuous. They are in many species spectacularly conspicuous, dressed in combinations of electric blue, brilliant yellow, vivid red, deep orange, and intense green that make them among the most visually striking animals in the entire Amazon. They do not hide, they advertise. The advertisement is a warning. The brilliant colors of poison dart frogs are aposematic, meaning they signal to potential predators that the animal bearing them is toxic or distasteful. The alkaloid toxins that make these frogs dangerous to predators are derived from the ants, beetles, and other arthropods that form their diet, sequestered and sometimes chemically modified by the frog's physiology and concentrated in specialized skin glands. A predator that attempts to consume a poison dart frog receives a rapid and unpleasant introduction to this chemical defense, and if the encounter is not immediately lethal, the predator learns quickly to associate the vivid colors with the unpleasant or dangerous experience and avoids similarly colored frogs in future encounters. The evolutionary logic of aposematism is the inverse of the evolutionary logic of cryptic coloration, but it operates through the same fundamental mechanism of predator learning and memory. Where cryptic species exploit the predator's visual system by preventing detection, aposematic species exploit the predator's memory system by ensuring detection and creating a strong aversive association between visual pattern and unpleasant consequence. Both strategies are ways of surviving in a world of predators. They simply operate at different stages of the predator-prey interaction, one before detection and one after it. The interesting evolutionary question about aposematism is how it gets started. If a predator has to learn that a brightly colored animal is distasteful, then the first few brightly colored individuals in a population face a terrible problem. They are conspicuous before the learning has taken place, which means they are more likely to be attacked than less conspicuous individuals, not less. The aposematic strategy only works once it is common enough in the population that most predators have encountered it and learned the association. Rare aposematic individuals in a population of cryptic ones are at a selective disadvantage, not an advantage. This evolutionary problem has several proposed solutions, including the possibility that some degree of chemical defense evolved before conspicuous coloration, with the initial coloration providing only modest detectability enhancement over a background of moderate chemical defense. Or it may be that the learning of chemical defense associations in predators is sufficiently rapid, after even a single experience with a moderately toxic individual, that even rare aposematic variants enjoy some selective advantage. The details of how aposematism evolves continue to be investigated by researchers, and the Amazon's extraordinary diversity of poison dart frog species, ranging from highly toxic and brilliantly colored to relatively non-toxic and cryptically colored, provides a rich natural experiment for studying the relationship between toxicity level and coloration conspicuousness. From the canopy, let us now descend again toward the water, because the Amazon's rivers and flooded forests hold more stories still to tell, and some of the most extraordinary of them involve creatures whose strategies for navigating the complex, seasonally variable aquatic environment have produced biological innovations of remarkable ingenuity. The seasonal flooding cycle of the Amazon is one of the most dramatic environmental rhythms in the natural world. During the wet season, which varies in timing across different parts of the basin, but in general runs from approximately November through June in the western Amazon, and from December through May in the eastern Amazon, rainfall across the basin fills the rivers to levels that would represent catastrophic floods in any other context. Water levels in the main river system may rise 10 to 15 meters above their dry season minimums, and the water that cannot be contained within the channel margins spreads outward across the adjacent forest, eventually covering an area of flooded forest that is, at its peak, larger than many entire countries. This flooding is not a disaster. It is a fundamental driver of the Amazon's ecology, a regular, predictable, and enormously productive event to which the entire biological community of the floodplain has adapted over millions of years. The floodwaters carry dissolved and suspended nutrients from upstream, depositing them across the forest floor as they spread. The aquatic community that moves into the flooded forest with the rising water, fish, invertebrates, aquatic insects, snails, and freshwater crustaceans, gains access to a vast new feeding ground packed with terrestrial insects, plant material, seeds, fruits, and other resources that are normally inaccessible to aquatic organisms. And the terrestrial community of the forest is connected, for months at a time, with the aquatic community of the river in ways that blur the boundaries between these two worlds and create ecological interactions of extraordinary richness. The fish that exploit the flooded forest are among the most ecologically important and most evolutionarily interesting animals in the Amazon. The Amazon basin hosts more freshwater fish species than any other river system in the world, approximately 3,000 described species and an estimated several thousand more yet to be described. This extraordinary fish diversity is in significant part a product of the flooded forest, which provides resources, refuges, and reproductive habitats that support a far greater number of species than the open river channel alone could accommodate. The arapaima, one of the largest freshwater fish in the world, reaching lengths of over 2 meters and weights of over 200 kilograms, is one of the most dramatic inhabitants of the flooded forest system. The arapaima is an obligate air breather, surfacing every 10 to 20 minutes to take a gulp of air through its modified swim bladder, which functions as a primitive lung. This air-breathing habit is an adaptation to the oxygen-poor conditions that develop in flooded forest water, where the decomposition of the enormous quantities of organic matter deposited by the flood rapidly depletes dissolved oxygen to levels that most fish cannot tolerate. The arapaima sidesteps this constraint by breathing air directly, making it independent of dissolved oxygen and capable of thriving in hypoxic conditions that would be lethal to most of its potential competitors and prey. The Arapaima's body is armored with large, tough scales arranged in a pattern that provides remarkable resistance to penetration. This armor is not merely cosmetic protection. Its structural design, a combination of a hard mineralized outer layer over a flexible, cross-ply fibrous inner layer, has been studied by materials scientists as a model for the design of flexible, penetration-resistant composite materials. The Arapaima shares its flooded forest habitat with piranha and other toothed fish, and its scale armor provides significant protection against their bites, allowing it to live among potential threats without the vulnerability that would otherwise be associated with a large, slow-moving fish in a predator-rich environment. The ecological role of the Arapaima in the flooded forest is significant. As one of the apex predators in this system, it consumes a wide variety of fish and other aquatic animals, regulating prey populations and influencing the community structure of the fish assemblage around it. Its air-breathing habit makes it uniquely visible at the water's surface, where it must come regularly to breathe, and this surface visibility makes it vulnerable to human fishing pressure in ways that fish which stay below the surface are not. The Arapaima has been intensively fished in many parts of the Amazon for a very long time, and its populations in heavily fished areas have declined significantly from historical levels. The fruit-eating fish of the flooded forest represent a different kind of ecological innovation, one with profound consequences for the seed dispersal ecology of the entire floodplain. Many fish species in the Amazon have evolved to consume fruit and seeds that fall into the floodwaters during the wet season, and their movements through the flooded forest carry seeds to new locations where they may germinate and establish new trees. The relationship between fruit-eating fish and the trees whose fruits they consume is a mutual dependency as intimate and as ecologically significant as the relationship between frugivorous birds and trees in the forest canopy. The tambaqui, a large charicid fish that can reach weights of 30 kilograms, is one of the most important seed dispersers in the flooded forest system. During the flood season, tambaqui move extensively through the flooded forest, consuming fallen fruits and seeds with powerful molariform teeth capable of cracking nuts and seeds that most other fish cannot access. Many of these seeds pass through the tambaqui's digestive system intact and are deposited at locations that may be considerable distances from the parent tree. The trees that depend on tambaqui for seed dispersal have, in many cases, evolved fruit and seed characteristics that facilitate this relationship, including hard seed coats that resist digestion and provide some protection for the seed during gut passage, and fruit characteristics that attract tambaqui specifically. The connection between tambaqui populations and the regeneration of floodplain trees is a concrete example of the interdependencies we discussed earlier in the context of long-term research. The trees need the fish to move their seeds. The fish need the trees to produce the fruits that are a major component of their diet during the flood season. Remove the fish and the tree's reproductive success is compromised. Remove the trees and the fish's nutritional resources are reduced. The entire flooded forest ecosystem, which is itself one of the most productive and most biodiverse aquatic systems in the world, depends on the maintenance of this fish-plant relationship among dozens of others. As we move through the flooded forest, drifting between the submerged trunks of trees whose crowns are still above water, watching the play of filtered light through the water surface above and around us, we arrive at a dimension of the Amazon's biology that is perhaps the most philosophically challenging of all the topics we will explore. The nature of biological complexity itself, and what it means for a system to be so complex that even the organisms within it cannot fully perceive the totality of their own relationships. Consider a single large canopy tree in the Amazon floodplain. It is, in a sense, a world. It supports a community of epiphytes in its crown, each of which supports a community of bromeliad tank organisms. Its bark surface is colonized by lichens, which are themselves complex biological partnerships between fungi and photosynthetic organisms. Beneath its bark, communities of beetles and other wood-boring insects have excavated galleries that are subsequently colonized by different communities of fungi and bacteria and invertebrates. Its roots extend into the soil and connect, through fungal mycorrhizal networks, to the roots of neighboring trees of different species, through which sugars and minerals and possibly information about environmental stresses are exchanged. Its flowers are visited by dozens of species of pollinating insects, birds, and bats. Its fruits are consumed by dozens of species of birds, mammals, and fish. Its fallen leaves are processed by hundreds of species of invertebrates, fungi, and bacteria on the forest floor. The tree itself, as a biological entity, is in continuous biological relationship with thousands of other species simultaneously. It is, in a real sense, not an individual organism but a community, a hub in a network of biological relationships so extensive that the concept of a clear boundary between the tree and its environment becomes meaningless. Where does the tree end and the ecosystem begin? When the mycorrhizal fungi in the tree's roots are exchanging resources with the roots of a neighboring tree, is the fungal network part of the tree or part of the forest or part of both? When the insects feeding on the tree's leaves are converting leaf tissue into insect biomass that is then consumed by a bird that carries those nutrients to a nest in another tree entirely, at what point does the tree become the bird or the nest or the forest? These questions are not merely philosophical games. They reflect a genuine feature of the Amazon ecosystem, the degree to which individual organisms are embedded in and constituted by their biological relationships. An organism in the Amazon does not simply occupy a habitat. It is woven into a fabric of relationships that extend in every direction, connecting it to species it never directly encounters through chains of interaction that may be many steps long, but are no less real for their indirectness. This realization has profound implications for how we think about the Amazon's extraordinary biodiversity. The high species diversity of the Amazon is not simply a list of organisms sharing the same space. It is a network of relationships, and the relationships are as important as the species themselves. A species removed from the Amazon takes with it not just its own biological characteristics, but its entire set of relationships, its role as predator and prey, as pollinator and pollinated, as disperser and dispersed, as host and parasite. The ecological consequences of a species' loss ripple outward through the network of relationships in ways that may be difficult to predict, but that can be substantial. The Amazon has had, over its geological history, a remarkable stability of species composition. Unlike many other regions of the world, which experienced dramatic species turnover during the climate oscillations of the Pleistocene ice ages, the Amazon appears to have maintained a relatively continuous tropical forest climate through much of this period, allowing species to persist and relationships to accumulate over very long timescales. The depth of ecological integration in the Amazon, the intimacy and specificity of the relationships between species, reflects this long history of coexistence and coevolution. Species that have been interacting for millions of years have had time to develop relationships of extraordinary precision and mutual calibration. With the afternoon settling into the forest and the light of the understory shifting to its characteristic late afternoon amber, we find ourselves drawn back to a theme that has run through everything we have explored, the theme of discovery itself and what it means to try to understand a system of this complexity. The history of scientific exploration of the Amazon is a history of partial victories and humbling reminders of limitation. From the earliest European naturalists who traveled the river system and returned with collections of specimens that astonished their contemporaries, to the modern researchers equipped with molecular genetic tools and remote sensing technology and sophisticated ecological theory, every generation of Amazon scientists has advanced the frontier of knowledge while simultaneously encountering new dimensions of complexity that their predecessors had not anticipated. The naturalists of the 19th century who explored the Amazon worked under conditions of extraordinary difficulty. They traveled by canoe and on foot through a forest that had no reliable maps and where the nearest medical assistance might be weeks of travel away. They collected specimens by hand, preserved them in alcohol or dried them in the field sun, and brought them back to institutions where colleagues with access to extensive reference collections could attempt to compare them to previously known species. Their work was heroic in its way, and the collections they built form the foundational reference point for Amazon biodiversity research to this day. But the methods available to them were fundamentally limited. They could document what they could see, catch, and preserve. The microscopic world of the Amazon was almost entirely invisible to them. The behavioral ecology of the creatures they collected was accessible only through brief field observations. The evolutionary relationships between species could be inferred only from comparative morphology, which, as modern genetic analysis has repeatedly demonstrated, often misleads in systems where morphological similarity reflects convergent adaptation to similar environments rather than close evolutionary relationship. Modern Amazon research has tools that the 19th century naturalists could not have imagined. DNA sequencing allows researchers to determine evolutionary relationships from tiny tissue samples, to distinguish cryptic species that are morphologically identical but genetically distinct, and to trace the movement of individuals and populations across the landscape using genetic markers. Remote sensing from satellites and aircraft allows mapping of forest structure and condition across the entire basin at resolutions fine enough to detect individual large trees. Acoustic monitoring using autonomous recording units can document the calls of all vocalizing species at a site continuously for months without requiring researcher presence. Camera traps triggered by motion provide photographic records of mammals and other cryptic animals at sites that researchers rarely visit. These modern tools have accelerated the pace of discovery in the Amazon dramatically. New species are being described at rates that reflect not only continued field exploration, but also the application of genetic analysis to museum collections and to field-collected tissue samples, revealing previously unrecognized species within what were thought to be well-understood taxonomic groups. The application of environmental DNA techniques, which detect the presence of species through the genetic material they shed into water or soil, is opening up entire new possibilities for documenting biodiversity at remote sites without the need for direct collection of specimens. Yet even with all of these tools, the fundamental challenge of working in a system of Amazon-scale complexity remains. The Amazon is so large, so diverse, and so logistically difficult to access that comprehensive documentation of even well-studied groups remains a distant goal. For every research site with decades of careful monitoring and extensive biological inventories, there are vast surrounding areas with almost no systematic biological data. For every species whose ecology is reasonably well understood, there are dozens or hundreds whose biology is known only from a handful of specimens or a few brief field observations. This situation means that scientific expeditions in the Amazon continue to be exercises in discovery in ways that expeditions to most other regions of the world are not. A research team entering a previously unstudied part of the Amazon basin can confidently expect to encounter species that have never been documented by science, to observe behaviors that have never been recorded, and to identify ecological relationships that were previously unknown. The frontier of discovery is not a distant boundary toward which scientists are slowly working. It is immediately present, a few days' travel from the nearest research station, waiting for someone to come and look. The experience of encountering something genuinely unknown in the Amazon, a species that has never been documented, a behavior that has never been observed, an ecological relationship that was not previously suspected, is one that researchers who have had it consistently describe as transformative. It recalibrates your sense of the relationship between human knowledge and the complexity of the living world in a way that is difficult to communicate to people who have not experienced it directly. You are looking at something that no human has ever understood, something that has been here, living its life, playing its role in the ecosystem for millions of years, entirely independent of human awareness or understanding. And you are the first person to see it clearly enough to begin to comprehend it. This experience is not the exception in Amazon research, it is the norm. And it is one of the most important things the Amazon has to teach us about our place in relation to the natural world. Evening returns to the Amazon with its characteristic suddenness. The amber light of late afternoon deepens quickly toward the amber brown of dusk, and the transition once again from day to night communities begins. But this evening, rather than following a single creature or a single ecological theme, let us allow ourselves to take in the full sweep of what the forest presents as it shifts from one temporal mode to another. The convergence of dawn and dusk communities creates brief windows of particularly intense biological activity. The diurnal predators are still active but beginning to seek roosts. The nocturnal predators are beginning to stir and hunt before their full emergence in deep darkness. Prey animals face a transition period of elevated risk, where threats from multiple directions and multiple sensory modalities accumulate simultaneously. A small rodent on the forest floor at dusk faces the possibility of encountering a hawk that has not yet found its roost, an ocelot that has just left its resting place, a bushmaster viper that has been waiting motionless all day and is now beginning to actively hunt, and a harpy owl that is earlier to emerge than most of its competitors. The dusk window concentrates predation risk in a way that has driven strong selection for appropriate prey behavior during this transition period. Many small mammals in the Amazon have evolved what researchers call crepuscular avoidance behavior, specifically reducing their activity during the dawn and dusk windows and concentrating it in the middle of the day or the middle of the night, when the mix of active predators is simpler and more predictable. This behavioral pattern reflects the accumulated evolutionary experience of millions of years of navigating the specific predation landscape of the Amazon's temporal transition periods. The spiders of the Amazon understory, a group of extraordinary diversity and ecological importance that is often underappreciated in popular accounts of the forest's biodiversity, are particularly active during the dusk transition. Large web-spinning spiders, some with webs that span several meters and are strong enough to catch and hold not just insects but small birds and bats, are building or repairing their webs in the fading light, positioning them to intercept the flying insects that are active during the dusk transition period. The geometry of orb weaver webs in the Amazon understory, their specific placement relative to vegetation gaps and light sources, reflects a precise understanding, encoded in the spider's behavior, of the flight paths and activity patterns of their prey. Wandering spiders, which do not build webs but hunt actively on the forest floor and lower vegetation, are also emerging from their daytime shelters at dusk. The largest of these, members of the family Ctenidae, can have leg spans approaching 30 centimeters and are capable of subduing relatively large prey, including small lizards, frogs, and nestling birds. Their sensory systems, particularly their mechanoreception through vibration-sensitive hairs covering their bodies and legs, are extraordinarily sensitive in the low light conditions of the understory, allowing them to detect the movement of prey through vibrations transmitted through vegetation and leaf litter rather than through visual cues. The leaf litter itself, which the wandering spiders traverse in their nighttime hunting, is a world of remarkable complexity that we have not yet explored in adequate depth. The deep layer of decomposing leaves, branches, seeds, and animal matter that accumulates on the Amazon forest floor is not simply a substrate. It is a habitat, one of the most biodiverse habitats in the entire forest, housing communities of mites, springtails, beetles, centipedes, millipedes, pseudoscorpions, isopods, and dozens of other invertebrate groups in densities that are difficult to comprehend without direct experience of sampling. A single square meter of Amazon forest floor litter, carefully extracted and examined, might contain hundreds of individual invertebrates representing dozens of species. The functional diversity of this community, the range of ecological roles played by different members, is as wide as that of any above-ground community in the forest. There are predators and prey at multiple trophic levels. There are detritivores that consume dead plant material directly. There are fungivores that consume the fungi breaking down that plant material. There are specialists that consume specific types of organic matter found only in the litter layer and nowhere else. The central ecological function of this litter community, the processing of dead organic matter and the recycling of its nutrients back into forms accessible to living plants, is one of the most critically important processes in the entire Amazon ecosystem. Without the litter community, the enormous quantities of organic matter falling from the canopy above would accumulate rather than decompose, locking up nutrients in unavailable forms and eventually smothering the forest floor beneath an ever-deepening layer of undecomposed material. The speed and efficiency of decomposition in the Amazon, which as we noted at the beginning of this journey is remarkably high, is entirely dependent on the litter community, on its diversity, its abundance, and the particular combination of species present that together can process the full range of organic compounds in the fallen material. The diversity of the litter community is therefore not a luxury, not a fascinating biological excess beyond what the ecosystem strictly requires. It is functional. Different species in the litter community can process different compounds, occupy different microhabitats within the litter layer, operate under different conditions of temperature and humidity, and together span a range of functional capability that no single species or even a small number of species could match. Remove diversity from the litter community, and the efficiency of decomposition declines. Remove enough diversity and nutrient cycling slows to the point where the productivity of the entire forest is affected. This is a specific instance of the general principle that biodiversity is not merely an aesthetic feature of the Amazon, it is a functional feature. The extraordinary species richness of this forest is not the product of biological excess, but of biological necessity, a requirement of a system that has evolved to process matter and energy with extraordinary efficiency, using the complementary capabilities of an extraordinary diversity of organisms. The Amazon night deepens around us once more, and in its depth we find the last and perhaps most philosophically profound of the themes that this forest raises, the nature of the system itself and the challenge of comprehending it. We have spent hours in this forest. We have followed the logic of natural selection as it has operated in this place for hundreds of millions of years, driving adaptations of extraordinary precision and extraordinary diversity. We have watched the potu become dead wood, watched the glass frog dissolve its own edges into transparency, watched the electric eel coordinate with its companions to overwhelm prey with synchronized electrical strikes, watched the bodo navigate flooded treescapes by acoustic imaging of a sophistication that rivals engineering. We have followed the Ophiocordyceps fungus as it pharmacologically rewires the brain of an ant to serve the fungus's reproductive agenda, and we have appreciated the devastating precision of this manipulation and the evolutionary arms race it has generated. We have spent time with the scientists who study these things, appreciating the difficulty and the incompleteness of Amazon research, and the way that incompleteness is not a failure, but a reflection of the genuine scale of the challenge. We have explored the temporal structure of the forest's ecology, the way it layers communities in time as well as space, creating a night Amazon as rich and as complex as the day Amazon, simply operating through different means. And we have tried to appreciate the deep interconnectedness of the system, the way every species is embedded in a web of relationships that extends in every direction, connecting it to everything else in the forest through chains of interaction that may be long but are never broken. All of this exploration has been building toward a realization that is, perhaps, the most important thing the Amazon has to teach. The realization that the world is more complex than any framework we bring to it, that the living systems of this planet operate according to principles and relationships that exceed our current understanding, and that will exceed it for a very long time to come. The Amazon resists categorization. We have tried throughout this documentary to organize what we know about the forest into comprehensible themes: concealment, communication, manipulation, sensory innovation, nocturnal ecology, and these themes have served us well as entry points into the forest's complexity. But the complexity does not actually organize itself into these categories. The glass frog's transparency is simultaneously a concealment strategy and an influence on the visual ecology of its predators, and a constraint on its physiology and a product of its evolutionary history in the flooded forest understory. The electric eel's social hunting is simultaneously a communication phenomenon and a predation strategy and an evolutionary arms race driver and an ecological force shaping the composition of fish communities in dry season pools. Every phenomenon in the Amazon is multiple things simultaneously, connected to multiple other phenomena through multiple pathways, and the analytical categories we use to approach it are tools of understanding, not features of the thing itself. This is not a counsel of despair. The partial understanding we have of the Amazon is real and valuable and hard-won. The individual observations, the documented behaviors, the measured ecological relationships, the described species, all of these are genuine contributions to human knowledge, pieces of a puzzle that we are slowly assembling even though we are not yet sure of its final form or final scale. But it is a counsel of humility. The Amazon demands intellectual humility from anyone who approaches it, because it is large enough and complex enough to make any single perspective feel, in the end, like a very small window onto a very large world. The Amazon at midnight is as far from silence as any place on Earth. The insect chorus has settled into its deep nighttime register, a continuous, many-voiced hum that fills the understory and seems to come from everywhere at once. The frog chorus along the river margin has reached its maximum intensity, dozens of species calling simultaneously in overlapping frequencies, the whole acoustic mass of it rising and falling in waves that have no individual conductor but that maintain, somehow, a coherence that you can feel as much as hear. In the water of the flooded forest, the Bodo is still moving, still sending its sonar clicks against the submerged trees and reading their returning echoes, still building its acoustic map of this watery world. In the canopy above, something large is moving through the darkness, too big for a bird, with the particular sinuous movement of a large cat, a jaguar perhaps, the apex predator of the Amazon, whose presence in the canopy is rarely documented because the jaguar is as cryptic in its habits as anything in the forest, revealing itself only occasionally and on its own terms. The jaguar is the Amazon's most powerful predator, and in many indigenous cosmologies its most significant spiritual presence. It hunts by night with eyes that can gather what little light remains in the forest darkness, with whiskers that detect air movements and the vibrations of nearby large animals, with a body designed for explosive power and precise strike rather than sustained pursuit. The jaguar does not chase. It waits, approaches, and strikes with a force and precision that reflects millions of years of predatory refinement in exactly this kind of environment. Its preferred killing method, a single bite directly through the skull or the back of the neck to the spine, is immediate and certain, an expression of lethal efficiency that is, in its own way, as remarkable as any of the other biological strategies we have examined. The jaguar's presence in the ecosystem is not simply that of a top predator consuming prey. As the apex predator, the the jaguar regulates the behavior and distribution of the large and medium-sized herbivores and omnivores that form its prey base, and through this regulation it influences the vegetation community that those animals browse and disperse. Forests with healthy jaguar populations have different vegetation structures and different plant community compositions than forests where jaguars have been eliminated, because the presence of a top predator changes the behavior of the prey species in ways that reduce browsing pressure in certain areas and allow certain plant species to regenerate that would otherwise be overgrazed. This cascade of effects from the top predator through the prey community to the vegetation is called a trophic cascade, and it is a reminder that the jaguar is not simply a fascinating animal, but a keystone component of the ecosystem whose functional role extends far beyond the individual animals it directly consumes. The jaguar moves through the darkness of the Amazon canopy, and we watch it go, following its movement by the occasional sound of a branch taking weight or a distant disturbance in the insect chorus as other animals detect its presence and fall momentarily silent. And in watching it go, we are watching something that has been here for a very long time, a biological entity shaped by this environment over more time than the human mind can really comprehend, playing a role in the system that nothing else plays in quite the same way. The hours before dawn in the Amazon are the quietest, the period when even the nocturnal community has mostly settled and the diurnal community has not yet stirred. The insect chorus continues as it always continues, but at its lowest intensity of the 24-hour cycle. The frogs have largely fallen silent, the owls have found their daytime roosts, the forest is as close to silent as it ever gets. It is in these quiet hours that the forest's other processes become most audible, the drip of condensation from leaf tips, the settling creak of large trees whose wood is adjusting to the temperature differential between their sunlit crowns, which cool rapidly after sunset, and their insulated bases. The movement of water through the flooded forest, almost imperceptible but continuous, carrying nutrients and seeds and small invertebrates through the submerged root systems. The barely audible sound of fungal growth, not literally audible of course, but present as the smell of decomposition that marks the forest floor and reminds you that even now, even in this pre-dawn quiet, the Amazon is working. The recycling continues, the nutrients move, the connections that constitute the system maintain themselves regardless of the time or the light level or the activity level of the visible community above. This is perhaps the deepest thing about the Amazon, it does not stop. There is no off switch, no period of genuine quiescence, no moment when the system pauses and rests. It runs continuously at every scale simultaneously, from the electrochemical processes within individual cells to the atmospheric water cycles that extend thousands of kilometers across the continent, all of it ongoing, all of it connected, all of it part of a single, unified process of enormous complexity and extraordinary duration. The Amazon has been running continuously in something like its current form, though of course it has changed and evolved over time for tens of millions of years. The specific community of species present today is different from the community of 1,000,000 years ago and vastly different from the community of 50 million years ago. But the fundamental processes, the carbon cycling, the water cycling, the energy capture and processing, the co-evolutionary arms races between predators and prey and hosts and parasites, these have been ongoing throughout, accumulating complexity and refinement with every passing generation. We are, in our brief encounter with this forest, witnessing a moment in a process of almost incomprehensible duration. The glass frog sitting on its leaf above the stream is the current expression of an evolutionary lineage that extends back through time in an unbroken chain of reproducing individuals, each one slightly different from its parent in ways that accumulated over millions of generations into the transparent, edge-dissolving, parental care-performing creature we see today. The same is true of every organism in the forest. the potu and the bodo and the electric eel and the ophiocordyceps and the jaguar and the bromeliad and the tambaqui, every one of them a current expression of a continuous biological process that began long before there were eyes capable of appreciating it. And the forest as a whole, the integrated, co-evolved system of relationships that we have spent this entire documentary trying to begin to understand, is itself such a process. It is not a thing but a process, not a static configuration of organisms, but a continuous flow of matter and energy and information through a network of biological relationships that is always in motion, always changing at every scale simultaneously, always becoming something slightly different even as it maintains, through the deep inertia of evolutionary history and ecological integration, a recognizable identity as the Amazon. The scientists who study the Amazon are engaged in one of the most important and one of the most humbling intellectual enterprises of our time. They are trying to understand a system of complexity that exceeds any other single ecosystem on Earth, using tools and methods that are powerful by the standards of their time, but that are still far from adequate to the task. They are making progress, real, tangible, important progress, describing new species and documenting new behaviors and measuring ecological relationships that were previously unknown. And with every step forward, they are encountering new dimensions of complexity that reveal how much further there is still to go. The researcher who has spent a career studying the seed dispersal ecology of a particular group of Amazon plants has developed a knowledge of her particular system that is deep and genuine and hard-won. She knows the fruiting phenology of dozens of plant species. She knows the identities and behaviors of their dispersers. She has measured the distances over which seeds move and the conditions under which they successfully germinate. She has data on the genetic structure of plant populations at different distances from each other, reflecting centuries of seed dispersal history in the genetic patterns of living trees. But she is also aware, more than most people, of how much she does not know. She knows that her study site is one tiny fraction of the Amazon basin. She knows that the relationships she has documented at her site may differ from those at sites 100 kilometers away because the Amazon is not homogeneous. She knows that the climate conditions under which she has been working are changing, and she does not know how those changes will affect the relationships she has spent her career documenting. She knows that the dispersers she has been tracking are affected by processes far beyond her study area, by the condition of the forest they use for nesting and roosting, and the fruit resources they depend on throughout the year at sites she has never visited. Her knowledge is real, but it is provisional, embedded in contexts she cannot fully control or predict. This is the character of Amazon science, real, important, genuine, and always provisional. Always aware that the system is larger than any individual perspective, that the relationships are more complex than any single study can capture, that the story is not finished and may never be finished, because the system is always changing and our capacity to understand it is always limited by the tools and the time and the access we have at any given moment. Dawn is coming again to the Amazon. The same gradual infiltration of gray into the darkness, the same cascade of bird voices building from the first pre-dawn callers to the full, overwhelming complexity of the complete dawn chorus. The same light, filtered through the same layers of leaf and branch and liana, arriving at the forest floor in the same amber-green diffuse glow that has arrived here every morning for millions of years. And yet it is not the same. Every dawn in the Amazon is slightly different from the one before. Different individual animals have survived the night and different ones have not. Different seeds have germinated, different leaves have fallen, different fungal threads have grown and extended and connected to new root systems. The specific configuration of living matter in this forest is different today from what it was yesterday, and it will be different tomorrow from what it is today, because the process is continuous and the change, though often imperceptible at human timescales of observation, is real and ongoing. The Amazon we are watching this morning is the most recent expression of a biological process that has no clear beginning and no foreseeable end. It is the current chapter of a story that extends back through geological time in an unbroken narrative of living systems, responding to their environments and shaping those environments in return, generating complexity through the simple repeated process of reproduction with variation and the selection of variants that reproduce more successfully than their competitors. What we have explored in this documentary is a small window into that story. The specific creatures and relationships and processes we have examined are real and important and extraordinary. But they represent a small fraction of what is happening in the Amazon at any given moment. Every square kilometer of this forest contains dramas and innovations and relationships that we have not begun to document, organisms we have not yet described, behaviors we have not yet observed, ecological connections we have not yet detected. This is not a failure. This is an invitation. The Amazon's resistance to complete understanding is not a problem to be solved, but a condition to be embraced, because it means that the frontier of discovery is not behind us but ahead of us, that the most important things we might learn about the natural world and about the principles that govern complex biological systems are still out there, waiting in the forest, waiting in the rivers, waiting in the litter layer and the bromeliad tanks and the dark waters of the flooded forest at night. The scientific expeditions that continue to enter the Amazon, the researchers who spend years in specific systems building the incremental, carefully qualified knowledge that constitutes our best current understanding of this place, they are not simply documenting what is already known. They are advancing into genuinely unknown territory, adding to the store of human knowledge one observation at a time, building a portrait of a system whose full complexity may be permanently beyond our reach, but whose partial understanding is immeasurably valuable. There is a particular quality to the light in the Amazon understory in the first hour after dawn. The canopy above is illuminated and alive with the movement and sound of the waking diurnal community, but the light that reaches the understory is still filtered, still softened, still amber-green and diffuse. It is the hour of transition when the nocturnal community has retreated and the diurnal community is fully active, but the light has not yet achieved the full, harsh, filtered brightness of midday. It is the hour when, if you are patient and quiet, you are most likely to see something that surprises you. The naturalists who have spent their lives in the Amazon describe this quality of surprise, of unexpected encounter, as one of the defining experiences of the forest. The Amazon does not yield its secrets readily. It does not present its most extraordinary creatures on schedule or in predictable locations. But it does, to observers who are patient and attentive and willing to look without preconceptions, offer moments of encounter with the unexpected that are among the most moving and most illuminating experiences that the natural world can provide. A flash of iridescent blue through the understory vegetation, gone before you can be certain you saw it, that resolves as you stand still and wait into a morpho butterfly settling on a patch of sunlight on the forest floor, its wings opening and closing slowly, revealing and concealing the extraordinary blue iridescence that makes it one of the most recognizable and most studied examples of structural coloration in the natural world. The blue is not pigment. It is not a chemical color. It is an optical effect produced by the microscopic structure of the wing scales, which diffract and reflect light in ways that produce an intense, pure blue that changes angle with the viewing angle. The butterfly is, in a sense, carrying a piece of the sky with it through the forest, and the biological function of this extraordinary coloration, whether it is a postmatism or mate choice signal or thermoregulation or some combination of these, is still a matter of active research and active debate. A movement in the canopy above, slow and deliberate, that resolves into the hanging form of a three-toed sloth, its fur colonized by a green tinge of algae that grows in the grooves of the individual hairs and provides a degree of camouflage in the green canopy environment. The sloth moves so slowly that its movement is almost indistinguishable from the motion of the branch in a gentle wind. Its metabolic rate is the lowest of any non-hibernating mammal in the world, a consequence of a diet of leaves so low in nutrition and so high in toxic compounds that the sloth must spend enormous amounts of time digesting what it eats, surviving on the very limited energy budget that this low-quality diet provides. The slowness is not laziness. It is an extreme metabolic economy, a biological strategy for surviving on resources that no other similarly sized mammal can exploit, because no other mammal has evolved the digestive and detoxification systems necessary to process them safely. A sudden, violent eruption of sound from a troop of spider monkeys in the canopy, the crashing of large bodies through branches, and the urgent, whooping calls that carry for hundreds of meters through the forest. They have detected something, a predator perhaps, or the presence of another spider-monkey troop on the boundary of their territory. Spider monkeys are among the most cognitively sophisticated of the Amazon's primates, with complex social structures, extended mother-offspring relationships, large home ranges that they navigate using detailed spatial memories, and a communication system whose richness and flexibility is among the most sophisticated documented in non-human primates. Their response to this morning's alarm, whatever has triggered it, will be coordinated, informed by the social knowledge of the group and the individual experiences of its members, played out through a vocal exchange that carries information about the nature of the threat, its direction, its distance, and the appropriate response. Each of these encounters, the butterfly and the sloth and the monkeys, is a window into a world of extraordinary biological complexity. Each one could sustain hours of exploration and explanation. Each one raises questions that research has partially answered and many more that remain open. And they are happening simultaneously, right now, in every corner of this forest, billions of individual organisms carrying out the programs of their evolutionary history in interaction with billions of other organisms doing the same. The whole system running its ancient, complex, beautiful, relentless process of living and reproducing and dying, and being recycled and living again. As our journey through the Amazon approaches its conclusion, let us return to the most fundamental truth that this forest embodies, the truth that what we know is only a small piece of a much larger, ongoing story. The species we have met in this documentary are not the most important or the most representative species in the Amazon. They are the species whose stories we could tell with the evidence currently available, the species about which enough has been observed and documented and analyzed to construct a coherent narrative of adaptation and ecological relationship. For every species whose story we have told, there are hundreds or thousands of species in the Amazon whose stories remain entirely untold, not because they lack stories, but because no one has yet spent enough time with them to begin to hear what those stories are. The Amazon is not finished, not as an ecosystem, not as a subject of scientific inquiry, not as a source of biological innovation and evolutionary discovery. It is a system in continuous motion, continuously generating new variants through the process of reproduction with variation, continuously testing those variants against the ever-changing environment that is itself partly constituted by the organisms living in it. The Amazon of 100 years from now will be different from the Amazon of today in ways that we cannot predict, because the system's complexity makes long-term prediction impossible. But if its fundamental integrity is maintained, if the web of relationships that constitutes the system remains intact, then the Amazon of 100 years from now will still be generating complexity, still refining the biological solutions of its inhabitants, still surprising researchers with new discoveries. This is the deepest argument for the value of this forest as a scientific and intellectual resource. The Amazon is not merely a storehouse of existing biological diversity, though it is that. It is an ongoing experiment in the generation of biological complexity, a natural laboratory that has been running for tens of millions of years, and that, if allowed to continue, will produce insights into the nature of life and evolution and ecological function, that we cannot yet anticipate because we do not yet know enough about the system to know what questions we have not yet thought to ask. Every new species described from the Amazon adds a data point to our understanding of how biological diversity is generated and maintained. Every new ecological relationship documented adds a piece to our model of how complex biological systems function. Every new behavior recorded, every new communication system analyzed, every new physiological adaptation characterized, contributes to a growing body of knowledge about the principles that govern living systems at scales of complexity that no human design system has come close to achieving. The Amazon is, among many other things, the world's most successful proof of concept for biological complexity. It demonstrates what is possible when life is given enough time, enough space, enough diversity of challenge, and enough stability of basic conditions to develop its full potential. It is a demonstration that the universe of biological possibility is far larger than our current understanding encompasses, that the principles of natural selection operating over geological time can produce systems of a richness and a sophistication that we are only beginning to comprehend. The light in the forest is full now. The dawn transition is complete, the full diurnal community active and the nighttime community settled into its daytime refuges. The Amazon is in its day mode, and the familiar sounds of the diurnal forest, the bird calls and monkey alarm cries and the constant, multi-layered background of insect sound, create the acoustic landscape that most visitors associate with the tropical rainforest. But we know now that this is not the whole Amazon. We know that beneath this acoustic layer there are the electrical conversations of knife fish and electric eels in the rivers below. We know that the still forms of potus on their branches are not dead wood, but living, watching, perfectly calibrated biological machines, maintaining a surveillance program through slitted eyelids while appearing to be inanimate. We know that the litter layer beneath our feet is a world of frantic biological activity, invisible to casual observation, but essential to the functioning of everything above it. We know that the mycorrhizal networks in the soil are exchanging carbon and minerals between trees across the forest floor, a biological internet of resource sharing that contradicts every assumption about the strictly competitive nature of plant communities. We know that the glass frogs above the stream are not simply green frogs on green leaves, but sophisticated optical systems exploiting the physics of edge detection. We know that the pink river dolphin in the flooded forest below is reading the three-dimensional acoustic structure of its environment with a precision that human sonar engineers would admire. We know that somewhere in this forest, almost certainly within a few kilometers of where we stand, species exist that have never been documented by science, living out evolutionary histories of extraordinary complexity in complete ignorance of and indifference to human awareness. The Amazon does not need us to understand it. It does not need our documentation or our science or our appreciation. It has been operating for far longer than our species has existed, and it will continue to operate according to its own logic regardless of what we know or do not know about it. But we need to understand it. We need to understand it because it is part of the world we inhabit, because the atmospheric and hydrological systems it generates influence climates across an entire continent, because the principles it embodies about the generation and maintenance of biological complexity are principles that apply to all living systems, including the ones that sustain human life, and because the more we understand the Amazon, the better equipped we are to appreciate and protect the living world in all its forms. As we prepare to leave the forest, to step back from the intimacy of this extended encounter and return to the distance that most of us maintain from the natural world in our daily lives, let us carry with us a few of the things the Amazon has tried to teach. Complexity is functional. The extraordinary biodiversity of the Amazon is not biological excess. It is the machinery of a system that requires complementary capabilities across a huge range of biological functions to operate with its characteristic efficiency and resilience. Diversity is not a luxury feature of living systems. It is a requirement of systems that must be able to respond to a wide range of challenges and process a wide range of materials under a wide range of conditions. This principle applies beyond the Amazon to every living system at every scale. Concealment and revelation are two aspects of a single evolutionary dialectic. Every creature in the Amazon exists in relation to others that are trying to find it or trying to avoid being found by it, and the strategies evolved on both sides of this relationship, the glass frog's transparency, the potu's performance of inanimate wood, the poison dart frog's brilliant aposematic advertisement, are all solutions to the same fundamental problem of visibility management in a world full of competing biological interests. The elegance of these solutions reflects the intensity and the duration of the selective pressures that shape them. Communication is as essential as metabolism. Every creature in the Amazon must exchange information with the world around it, whether through the complex acoustic signals of primates or the electrical pulses of knifefish or the chemical pheromone trails of ants or the bioluminescent displays of fireflies. The diversity of communication modalities in the Amazon reflects the diversity of the environments and the relationships within which communication must occur, and the sophistication of those modalities reflects the importance of reliable communication for survival and reproduction in a world of extraordinary complexity and competition. Science is an ongoing conversation with a system that is always more complex than the current understanding. The Amazon teaches this more directly and more emphatically than perhaps any other subject of scientific study, because its complexity is so large that the gap between what is known and what remains unknown is always visible. This is not a counsel of despair, but an invitation to continued inquiry, a reminder that the most important work of scientific understanding is always ahead of us, not behind us. And finally, the Amazon teaches that there are dimensions of the natural world that require patience, attention, and genuine commitment to begin to perceive. The forest does not reveal itself to the hurried or the inattentive. It requires time. It requires the willingness to sit still in humid, insect-rich darkness for hours, to look at the same square meter of bark for long enough to see what is living there, to listen to a dawn chorus until the individual voices within it begin to separate and be heard as distinct rather than merging into an undifferentiated acoustic mass. The Amazon rewards patience in proportion to the patience offered, and the rewards it offers, the potu resolving from dead wood into living presence, the glass frog dissolving its edges into the leaf surface beneath it, the bodo's exhalation disturbing the perfectly still surface of the flooded forest at midnight. These rewards are among the most extraordinary experiences the natural world has to offer. The forest holds us for one last moment. The light is warm and the air is alive with the sounds of a community that has been awake now for several hours, going about its ancient business of living and competing and cooperating and reproducing. Somewhere above us in the canopy that we cannot quite see from the forest floor, a pair of scarlet macaws is calling, their voices carrying easily through the layers of vegetation, bright and sharp, and absolutely present against the softer background of the forest's constant biological noise. A butterfly crosses the path in front of us, its wings moving with the particular lazy efficiency of a creature for whom flying is not an emergency, but a normal mode of locomotion in an environment it has known all its brief adult life. A leaf falls from somewhere far above, spiraling downward through the layers of the forest with a leisurely, weighted grace, passing from the bright light of the canopy through the filtered light of the understory into the deep shade of the forest floor, where it settles with a barely audible sound onto the surface of the litter layer, beginning immediately the long process of decomposition that will, over the next weeks, return its substance to the soil and eventually to the living forest again. This is the Amazon. This is what it is: a leaf falling, a butterfly crossing a path, a macaw calling in a canopy we cannot see. And beneath these visible things, layer upon layer of biological process and relationship and history, stretching back through time and outward across a continent, connecting everything to everything in ways that we are only beginning to map and may never fully comprehend. It is enough, more than enough. It is one of the great wonders of this world, and the fact that we cannot fully understand it does not diminish it. It enlarges it. It makes it, if anything, more worthy of the attention and the patience and the continued inquiry that this forest demands and deserves. The Amazon breathes. And in its breathing, in the slow, vast cycling of water and carbon and nutrients through its living tissues, it sustains something irreplaceable. A proof that the natural world, given time enough and space enough and the freedom to develop its own complexity, produces wonders beyond anything we could have designed or predicted. Wonders that continue to unfold, morning after morning, in the filtered green light of a forest that has been here longer than we can remember and that carries within it, in the relationships and the adaptations and the ongoing evolutionary processes of its billions of inhabitants, more of the story of life on Earth than we will ever fully read. The Amazon continues, and so does the discovery.